Good evening. We're going to call tonight's regular meeting to order. Mr. Kielstrom, could you please call the roll? We're going to call this evening's meeting to order. Mr. Kielstrom, will you please call the roll?
Chair Taylor,
Present.
Vice Chair Wyatt,
Here.
Director Shoemaker,
Here.
Director Sloop,
Here.
Director Vidal.
Here.
Thank you.
Our first order of business this evening is to hear from our student representatives. So first up, we're going to hear from Riverside High School, and I'd like to welcome Lucia to the microphone.
Hello, board members. I hope you had a great holiday season. I am so excited to be here and give you an update on the school we are at right now. This is such an amazing opportunity, not for myself, but also for Riverside. First of all, last Friday was our rock band's first concert of the year. They performed at the Youth Music Project at 7 p.m. and had a great turnout. We are also going to have another information night on January 29th, so stay updated. Everyone here is welcome to join us at 6 p.m. On to the athletics. Our boys basketball team has played a huge variety of teams from 5A to 1A, from frosh through varsity teams. We are growing as a team and are having a great time. We have a home game on Thursday at 4:30 p.m. You all are invited to come and support our Raptors. We have a combined team again this year with Riverdale for our girls basketball team. This has been a great partnership for both schools so that we are able to have the numbers for two teams and cross-school relationships. We have a great group of both boy and girl wrestlers. We wrestled at one of the Westland matches last week and we came out undefeated against 6A JV opponents. We have a significant group of boys and girls swimmers who had their first big meet last Saturday and another two coming up this Thursday and this Saturday. We also have a handful of athletes on the ski and snowboard teams this season. They are enjoying the snow up on the mountain and competing against other athletes. Off of the athletics, this week is the start of our essentials drive. Students can bring canned foods, lightly used clothes, and anything else on our long list to be donated to those in need. Our drive ends on Friday, and whoever's life class brings in the most items will get a donut party. Everyone's very competitive. Next week is finals week. Students are cramming in the last of the studying before they have to test their knowledge on the past semester. And After School Academy is a great place to do that. They can work on assignments, study with teachers and peers, or take missed tests. As well as some classes have already started their final project. One of those classes is our business management class. Today was the first day of the Shark Tank final our business class teacher, Mr. Mitchell, had created. Some students in groups, me and my group included, create a product that they present to a table of sharks or a couple of teachers and other business people who are friends with Mr. Mitchell. So far, only one group has gotten an offer for their outstanding product. We are rapidly approaching the ISEF Science Fair date with all of the students, myself included, trying to finish up the last of their research to start conducting experiments and tests to present next month. Riverside is so happy to be hosting this year and hope to wow everyone with an amazing science fair this year. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Next up, we welcome Mia from Westland High School.
Awesome. Good evening, Linn-Wilsonville School Board. It's nice to see you all again. I hope you all had a very relaxing winter break and had some fun while you were at it. December 9th through 20th was Westland's Winterfest. Winterfest takes place during the last 2 weeks before winter break. During this time, ASB decorated the school with silver snowflakes, chains, and tinsel, had a winter-themed spirit week, and held lunch activities in the library alongside some of Westland's clubs. Some of these activities included karaoke hosted by our thespians, chess and jazz, cookies handed out by the Psychology Honor Society, and many more. ASB also sold candygrams for Winterfest, in which students could purchase a candy cane for their friends and write a heartfelt holiday message to be delivered to them at the end of the 2 weeks. Winterfest came to a close with our winter assembly on December 20th. During this assembly, we got to see and hear performances from the Westland High School Choir Fresh Pitch, our staff choir, dance team, cheer team, and the winners of our Club's Got Talent competition, the Asian Pacific Islanders Club. Our student body competed in a few fun rounds of Lions Feud, our own take on the game Family Feud, but ultimately lost to our staff team in the final round. The Westland High School Band, Choir, and Orchestra all held their winter concerts on the week of December 16th. They were all very successful and sounded absolutely wonderful. This past Saturday, Westland had our winter ball at the Portland Art Museum. Our theme this year was Silver Bells, and our students had a blast and danced the night away. Our Westland athletics are absolutely crushing it as of now in the beginning of their seasons. Currently, our boys basketball team has 10 wins and 1 loss. Our girls basketball team has 6 wins and 6 losses. Our girls and boys swim teams also have had a lot of success in their season so far, taking wins over many teams, including St. Mary's and Tigard. Our wrestling team beat Lake Oswego in their duel last Thursday. And last but not least, senior dance team captain Lily Walsh had an incredible performance and was selected for the 2025 OSAA/DDCA All-State Dance Team. That is all I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to reporting back to you next month during semester 2.
And now we welcome Carter from Wilsonville High School.
Just a little taller. All right. Good evening, Dr. Ludwig and members of the school board. On behalf of leadership and ASB at Wilsonville High School, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I am the ASB president at Wilsonville and excited to give you an update for the last month here at Wilsonville. Also, as it is School Board Appreciation Month, I would just like to say thank you to all of you and all the hard work you've put in hours and things you do for our community. This past month was spent mostly during winter break, but that did not stop Wilsonville High School from rolling as usual. In the world of athletics, our boys and girls basketball teams have both started their seasons. The boys 8-2 and girls 3-8, both very excited to start off league play. Wrestling has also started their season and have had 2 matches and are looking forward to the rest of the season, as well as swim team season is off and already having 3 meets. One this last weekend where the boys placed 4th and the girls placed 3rd. As well as this winter season, we have had snowboard team was hitting the slopes very often and is being prepared for their banked slalom competition on the 18th and 25th. In the world of drama, our program is well into practice of Radium Girls. They look forward to this production and getting everything ordered and ready to go, as they will be performing February 27th, 28th, March 1st, 6th, 7th, and 8th. Seniors have been working hard on college applications, financial aid applications, and thinking about this next school year. One group of students spent last Friday working on preparing for scholarships. The event Path to Scholarships was planned by the Oregon Association of Bilingual Administrations and was supported by our language specialists. These students learned about opportunities that are available to them and had time to organize their thoughts to write their essays. We also have a group of students who have started volunteering at Sunshine Division each month as an option during life class access time. This opportunity is open to all students, but this last week they packed 250 food boxes. Being that this is located in Wilsonville, it is nice for Wilsonville students to go and serve their local communities. In the student realm, our senior class council has been planning our Wilsonville Winter Formal, which will be held at Wilsonville High School on February 1st. Our ASB class continues to be hard at work in planning assemblies and new activities to help build school spirit and community, as well as we had our recent necessity drives before break, which helped us raise over 400 items that will then be given out to our community. Also, the day before break, we had our winter assembly, which included many games like Jeopardy, as we also presented awards to our state champions in football and girls soccer, as well as our art department was recognized and awarded a $10,000 donation from the Charbonneau Arts Commission, who have been partnered with them for many years now. And yeah, thank you for your time. That's all I have for you, and look forward to reporting to you next month. Thank you.
Next up on the agenda are recognitions, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Ludwig.
Thank you. And again, thank you to our students. You are excused to go if you'd like to. Thank you for being here, preparing those reports. And I know, Lucia, you didn't hear me because my mic wasn't on, but the rock band concert was so great Friday night. So please extend my appreciation to the group. Every January, we get the opportunity to recognize the volunteer service of our school board and school boards across Oregon and across the nation. And I think about how these roles have taken on more over the years than perhaps school boards in the past. Just the season of whatever's happening in the community or nationally. And what I'm always impressed with is how school boards today not only think about their own school districts and the plans ahead, but really have become a collaborative across the state, visiting each other's school districts, attending conferences, advocating in Salem for K-12 funding. We'll hear more about that tonight, but I just want to thank each of you for going above and beyond what I think perhaps you thought you were signing on to during these times, but just being so approachable, available to the community, and again, so much of your time away from family, your work, to volunteer in this role. So thank you. We have a proclamation that we read each month. And this is the School Board Recognition Month proclamation. And all across Oregon, school boards are being recognized with proclamations like this. Whereas school boards create a vision for what students should know and be able to do. Whereas school boards establish clear standards for student performance. Whereas school boards ensure that student assessments are tied to established standards. Whereas school boards are accountable to the community for operating schools that support student achievement. Whereas school boards align school district resources to ensure that students meet standards. Whereas school boards create a climate that supports the philosophy that all children can learn at high levels. Whereas school boards build collaborative relationships based on trust, teamwork, and shared accountability. And whereas school boards are committed to continuous education and training on issues related to student achievement, now therefore we hereby declare our appreciation to the members of the West Linn-Wilsonville School District School Board and proclaim the month of January to be School Board Recognition Month. We urge all citizens to join us in recognizing the dedication and hard work of local school board members in preparing today's students for tomorrow's world. And this is dated January 13th, 2025, and I'll be signing it and putting it into record. At your table, you have several tokens. I think the ones that will perhaps be the most dear to you are messages from students and staff and leaders of their schools in appreciation. So I want to thank each of you again for your community service, for your many, many hours, and for just being such a spectacular school board to our community. With great gratitude, thank you. And I invite folks to appreciate the school board with a round of applause.
All right, it is now time for board reports, and we will get started with Director Shoemaker.
Thank you. First of all, want to thank Principal Chapin for hosting us tonight. It's kind of nice to get out of the district office building sometimes for these meetings, so I appreciate that. I think what's been on my mind most recently, obviously, is our so many great meetings with our elementaries, but also funding in general. And as someone who's been in education or had been in education for a long time, I've certainly seen the big swings that feel like massive swings in school funding. And I still have enough contacts in other districts to know just how challenging this is all around Oregon at this time. And a reminder, and I want to thank Directors Sloop and Vidal for the work they're doing around advocacy in Salem around this, because it just feels like, you know, when things are this hard, you know, when my colleagues in other districts are saying they cannot believe the numbers they're talking about, that something's got to be done. So that advocacy is so important, and I appreciate your willingness to work with anyone who wants to support in that way. I want to compliment our community on the tone around the work we've been doing around the work with the primaries and this discussion of consolidation. I feel like I've seen this tone shift from sort of a stunned to, okay, let's get down and dig and figure out what we can do. And I've heard so many people offering suggestions, and I've really appreciated that. And I want the community to know that obviously we take our stewardship responsibility incredibly seriously, but also that you do have really good ideas. There's a lot of really good ideas coming from our community. That's not lost. That Small Schools Task Force report is voluminous. And sometimes it's just a note that someone just dropped in that maybe they didn't even share with the table group, that they just dropped a note, or it might be an email they sent one of us. But these are all good ideas. And I'm convinced that that any time we're dealing with this level of funding deficit, that there's no one single solution that's going to get us there. There's a lot of work to be done and a lot of ways to look at this. So I appreciate everyone's continued willingness to look at the hard things. And I'll stop with that.
Thank you. Director Sloop.
So I will echo Director Shoemaker that I'd like to also thank the Small School Task Force for their time, their dedication and commitment over the past several months. And I'm sorry that you were not able to gather for the last meeting to generate a collaborative report. But I do appreciate receiving from the parents on the task force who created a report of their own findings, or their own report of the findings. I'd like to thank the PTA presidents from Cedar Oak, Bolton, and Stafford for organizing the listening sessions. And I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to the parents, community members, and staff and the teachers for meeting with us and sharing their stories from their school community and as well as their experiences. Community voice is valued, as well as teacher voice. I wanted to also mention that last week, Director Vidal and I went to a community solutions forum, and as Director Shoemaker said, there's some great ideas. I definitely appreciate the ideas, the solutions, and the collaborative effort. So thank you for taking the time and organizing, and as well as offering ideas and solutions to get us through our budget shortfalls. Tonight, under our consent agenda is information on transfers coming into our district as well as going out. And you can also go on the website, and there's information on the school district website. There's nothing new. We're just going to go ahead and vote on the consent agenda, but it's basically the same decisions that were made last year will apply to this year. And that is that our district will release 20 students to transfer out if that school district's that they want to go to will accept that release. And then we will be accepting anyone that wants to come into our district who would be released by their school. In K through 8, And then there's a number of students that would be accepted in just ninth grade, 15 at Riverside and 5 at Westland and Wilsonville High School for ninth grade. More details are again listed in the agenda. And wanted to mention also that the tuition, we are not a school that charges tuition because we want to have it be an equitable opportunity and not have it based on who can pay to come to the school district. And then lastly, Director Vidal and I would like to extend an invitation to join us for 2 upcoming legislative events. The first is this Wednesday, January 15th, from 7 to 8:30 at Clackamas Community College. It's the Harmony Campus in Milwaukee. And then the second is a pre-session town hall. Is the other slide up? With Representative Neuron and Bowman and Senator Woods this Saturday from 2 to 3:30 at the King City Civic Association. This will provide an opportunity to hear about their legislative priorities, as well as we can share our advocacy for special education funding.
And Director Vidal.
There we go. I first want to thank Riverside High School for hosting us tonight. It's so great to be here. I want to also echo Director Shoemaker and Director Sloop in thanking all of the small school task force members for their very hard work. I would also like to thank the parents, families, neighbors, teachers, and paraeducators who have come out to the events, the listening events this last week, and then also who have emailed us about their unique school stories, about their ideas for solutions to our incredibly serious and real budget shortfall, causing the board to make difficult decisions this year. And like Director Sloop said, we are committed to advocating for the full funding of the governor's budget of $11.36 billion. So thank you so much for having us. That's it.
Chair Taylor.
Good evening, everybody. Good to see you all, which I can't see you, but if I could, I wish I could. I had to travel this week, so my apologies for not being able to be there in present and in person, excuse me. And my voice is a little bit raspy just from the travel. These planes will get you. So I think that most of you have covered everything that I would have to say or provide any insight on. I just want to say thank you for all of the people who may be in the room that I can't see for coming out. I know tonight is a meeting that is heavy on the community's heart. And so I hope that in this meeting you get some clarity maybe on questions that you've had or some better understanding of where we are. I think it's probably been pounded in pretty good, but you know, sometimes it's just hearing it a few times for it to kind of set in. And I know that everything that is heard tonight probably will not sit well with everyone. Maybe there's going to be more questions that you walk away with, or our emails will get some friendly, we hope, friendly requests. So just know that as I speak to myself, and I think I understand the character of my colleagues, that you know, we'll do our best to respond and answer questions if something is missed tonight, or maybe didn't sit well, or I don't know, maybe you just got some things on your mind that you'd like to share. So Just know that we're here. We do our best to respond in a timely manner. Sometimes with travel like this, we might be a little bit behind, but I just want to say thank you for the patience and the grace that has been extended in some of these in-person listening sessions, and to the PTA presidents at all three schools that are kind of in the crosshairs of this particular topic. We thank you for your hard work. I know that was mentioned earlier, and opening up your schools and your communities even further to us. So that's all I have for this evening, and I look forward to seeing you guys all in person again real soon. So thank you.
I'd just like to echo that thank you to the Bolton, Cedar Oak, and Stafford PTAs, and especially the presidents for accommodating all of us at your PTA meetings last week. I know that took time out of your calendars, and just really appreciate that time. And also just want to make sure that we mention that we did move our meeting to Riverside High School today, and then Westland High School at the end of the month. Obviously, as you can see, that took a lot of preparation to make sure that we were able to broadcast this meeting. If you are watching from home and if the sound and the video isn't what you're accustomed to, thank you for bearing with us, but we did think it was important to make sure we had a venue that could accommodate everyone that wanted to attend. And we're hopeful that this is a space that everyone could access and be part of this meeting. So thank you too to our staff for making all of this possible. And so at this point, I'll turn it over to Director Ludwig for our superintendent report.
It'd be going back and forth between glasses on and glasses off. But I think we can all see the screen here. And again, I want to thank also our staff for, there's a lot of work in just setting up in another venue that sometimes we don't think about. So even things like microphones and screens. So thank you. We can go ahead to the next slide. I am going to spend my report tonight talking about budget. I typically highlight things happening in the district, and I'll catch up for that in February. But given presentation tonight and the board's deliberation at our next meeting, there's some information we want to make sure is clear to our community. Additionally, I want to mention, and thank Director Vidal and Director Sloop for your advocacy at many different functions last month and this month. On the back, if folks came in and they signed up on clipboards, there are also some flyers put out by Clackamas County that just describe the funding need and the advocacy around the state. So it's encapsulates what we're going to talk about tonight as well, collectively put together by all 10 school districts and our community college. So where we just want to start is just reminding ourselves that the governor came out in December proposing for the next biennium the 11.36 billion, which we've mentioned. And so that's the starting number. The governor can propose a budget, but it's really the legislators that approve it. So there is time in the next couple of months where the Ways and Means Committee will consider that amount. They have the purview, the ability to raise that amount, to lower that amount, or to keep it at the governor's proposal. The governor also, in addition to that, renewed and set forward 127 million towards early literacy. Portion of that is towards the early literacy grants that school districts receive. Others is towards early childhood literacy. And then also 78.5 million towards summer learning. And that's over the biennium. So for each year and towards all 197 school districts and charter schools that are eligible. Even with this budget, what you're going to hear tonight, and you already are hearing across school districts and across Oregon, is that budgeting challenges still persist. And that districts across Oregon, including ours, will be making reductions next year. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. There is collective movement across various groups, the Oregon School Board Association, the School Administrators Association, OEA, which is the Licensed Oregon Education Association of Licensed Teachers, and quite a large number of legislators. And to that, I do want to thank Representative Neuron, who has been a steadfast advocate for public school funding. And collectively, each of these groups is advocating for securing the 11.36 billion, not to go any lower than that or higher if the Ways and Means Committee will agree. And then some areas of additional funding, one of those being raising the special education cap. Right now we get reimbursed 11%, but raising it to 15%, which is what that is nationally in other states. But asking that this increase be additional funding and not just redistribution of the current funding. So there's a difference there. Funding high-cost disability, fully funding that, and increasing the funding to early childhood services. There are many times when legislators have very worthy mandates around the state to make changes. Sometimes they come to school districts with no extra funding. And then to enact those mandates across the state, school districts then have to draw from their general fund to meet those new mandates. And often in the passing of those mandates, folks are thinking about the change it will make to people's lives, and we'll talk about a few of those, but often aren't thinking who's going to pay for the changes. And we've received over the years a number of those as school districts, and they increase over time. And you'll hear about those tonight. So our request also to legislators in Salem is please no more unfunded mandates. If you do have worthy ideas for legislation that does impact employees, then we ask that you think about sending the funding with the mandates. Next slide. So for those of you who have been attending many of these board meetings over the last 6 months in particular, or even last year, these slides might look familiar, the topic is familiar, but we do know that sometimes in people's busy lives, they enter the conversation at different points. It's like opening the book to chapter 4 and not knowing what happened in the previous chapters. So some of this will be review for people maybe watching for the first time tonight, as neighbors have told them about what's happening, or are curious and haven't been reading some of the information out there in the media. So how is it that school districts are in a budget shortfall? Well, really, it's kind of a simple formula in a lot of ways. Revenue is decreasing and costs are increasing. And for us, revenue is decreasing because our enrollment is decreasing. When a large part of our funding is per student allocation and you're going down in enrollment, that's a significant amount of revenue then that is decreasing. We'll hear about some other revenue sources that have been decreasing over time, but essentially our largest portion is about our state school fund and our local property tax, which is connected to our enrollment. And then you'll hear again tonight, and you can just go on the internet and Google and you'll hear about cost increases in Oregon and nationally that contribute to school district budget challenges. Next slide. So I won't read through this, but you can see essentially that across Oregon, from COVID until now, K-12 public schools have lost about 35,000 students. So these were students in our system right before COVID, but then when the pandemic hit, a lot of families made decisions about schooling that fit their needs, whether it was to homeschool or virtual charter school. Families relocated. And so across Oregon, we are down 35,000 students since the fall of 2019. There was a sense and a wonder if the students would come back after the pandemic, which is why school districts were kind of in a holding pattern, not doing a lot of layoffs, keeping programs as they were, even though enrollment had gone down. We all hoped that it was temporary, but we're just in a new reality around our new enrollment level in the state. Next slide. You can see here where West Linn-Wilsonville School District this was in 23-24. We could update it to this year, but we're actually not finished with the year. And so the number would probably fluctuate a little bit, but almost 900 students less than where we were right before COVID. And you can see other school districts in a similar predicament. Paired with that, if you've been watching the news, globally, as well as nationally, the birthing rate has slowed down. Economics, all sorts of situations. That has come alongside the pandemic, and now we are seeing fewer students entering kindergarten, whether it's connected still to school choice or the number of children in our community. Those are things that we don't have a very clear picture on, but we do have demographic forecasts around how both of those will impact our school district over the next 10 years. And this is not just Linn-Wilsonville School District, but we're experiencing it across the state. We had a 10-year projection completed by Flow Analytics upon request from the Long Range Planning Committee as we were putting together our long range plan. In that, Flow Analytics used a complex methodology using census data, community planning, birth rate, death rate, move in, move out. And through that, they project over the next 10 years what they think is going to happen in terms of enrollment in a school district. And I know it's hard to see those numbers. You'll have it in your binders. But the real numbers we have are on the left. You can see that blue line right up until the tip of the arrow. You can see where we were, close to 10,000 students, and then COVID hit and how enrollment has gone down. And now it's continuing to go down in our community as well as in some other communities in Oregon. Right at that tip is where Flow Analytics has the most accurate information because it's past information. Anything forward from that is their projection, and they put them into a low, medium, and high scenario. The scenario we were using with our small schools task force and our long range planning committee is the middle scenario, the green bar. Well, we are 1 year into now that projection to see how close we are to Flow Analytics projections, and we're actually below that middle scenario with today's numbers, just almost halfway in between the middle scenario and the low scenario. So all that to say, again, we're only 1 year into that projection, but it is bearing out that we are still on the decline. We weren't on the other side of that green graph towards the red. We're actually trending below. So enrollment is one of the ways that we get our state school funding. And every biennium, the Ways and Means Committee and legislation appropriates a certain amount of the state fund to K-12 schools. There's other places where funding goes, social services, housing, law enforcement, higher education. But we are a large portion of that state funding as government agencies. And so K-12 schools get a portion and an allocation. And each biennium, there's a percentage increase of that allocation. You can see each of the bienniums on the left, 11-13, 13-15, 15-17, and each biennium, there's an increase from the biennium before, and I put that in the middle column. So from the 11-13 biennium to the 13-15, you could see that that was a 12% increase. And so there was a pattern of a certain amount of increase that actually was keeping pretty proportionally around inflation increase, cost of living, employee raises, utilities, that school districts were able to kind of keep up with expenditures based on the biennium that was given, the biennium amount that was given. But here's where we start to see a little difference. in the last few biennia. In 1921, there was a $9 billion revenue allocation. It was 10% from the biennium before, so slightly less than what it was trending. But at the same time, legislation passed around what was called the High School Success Grant. And a large grant was given because of the concern around graduation rates. A grant was given to school districts, public school districts, to improve graduation rates. Majority of the funding had to go towards staff in high schools and programs in high schools. It was given per student, and it was called a supplemental grant. In other words, you couldn't put current people who you already had in your budget into that grant. This was to go above and beyond. So it was adding new staff, new programs, and new teachers, and the funding to go with it. Oh, stay back on that slide. Thanks. So slightly less in the state school fund in the biennium, but there was also this grant, but the grant didn't support the general fund. It was to do additional work. In the next biennium, you can see the increase only went to 9.3 billion, a 3% increase from the biennium before. At that same time, there was additional legislation called the Student Success Act. Out of that is a grant called the Student Investment Account, the SIA grant. And in this grant, school districts were asked to really work on closing achievement and opportunity gaps where there was academic disparity for students, as well as mental health support. And you can see the timing of that. We were working to come out of COVID. Districts were told, this is extra money for you to be able to help students coming out of the pandemic, for you to be able to close achievement gaps, and for you to address mental health concerns. Particularly also achievement gaps for students who have been historically marginalized. When you add the money there from the grant to the shortfall that we can all see in the state school fund, you could get close to that 9.9 billion. Maybe in some school districts, it was a little bit more of that percentage, because this grant was not given per student, it was given based on demographics. So it had a weighted capacity to it, and some districts got more than others, even if they were the same size school district. So improved outcomes were expected with this extra money, even though it really wasn't extra money. It was just carved out of what school districts were hoping to get in their new biennium. Because it was a carve out, legislators and ODE were lenient and said you could supplant, in other words, staff who you already were paying for your general fund, instead of letting them go because there was a reduced biennium funding, you could pay for them out of the grant. So we moved counselors over to the grant, social workers over to the grant, teachers over to the grant, who were doing this type of work identified in the description of the SIA grant. The following biennium, the one we're finishing up right now, came with a $10.2 billion increase, which was 10%, but 10% of the already low amount, not 10% of the state school fund plus the SIA grant. Otherwise, it would have been 9.9 with another 10%. We still have the high school success grant funding those additional staff. We still have the SIA grant, but remember, we moved staff into that. It wasn't really extra money. It just supplanted what we should have received in our state school fund. And then the governor in the last biennium approved an early literacy grant to school districts coming out of COVID and noticing that there was still achievement gaps around early literacy, but it required districts to match it with 25% of their own fund. So even if we had to kind of show where we were already spending 25% of that grant amount towards early literacy, and then we would get the other 75% from the grant. And as I mentioned earlier, the governor has proposed renewing that again in this biennium. She set aside 127 million. It's not in legislation. This is connected to this governor's initiatives. So stay on that slide. So when I mentioned that revenue is not keeping up, as we look at that amount, that 10 or 11% that is allocated, unlike previous years, it's not keeping up when costs of operations and payroll are outpacing the 10 or 11%. When our payroll and benefits are increasing every year or biennium by 12 or 15%, that 10% or 11% isn't enough. When utilities and transportation are increasing and insurance liability and workers' compensation, we're getting early estimates. That's going to be up 15 to 20% from the previous year. And then we're all hearing right now about PERS and the retirement rates that have come out, and they have doubled. And so for our district alone next year, that's an additional $6 million. So it's very hard to operate year to year with what would be the roll-up costs when the costs are outpacing that revenue from the state. Okay. So many of us are in this position of budget shortfalls. You can see a list on the right. It's not just happening here in Oregon, Southwest Washington, all over the state and nationally. Next. And I just mentioned that when costs are going up and outpacing that revenue source that's coming in, it continues to make this and widens this gap between funding in and expenditures out. That gap continues to get wider and wider. I do want to talk about that middle bullet point, unfunded mandates. I mentioned earlier that when legislators approve some legislation towards employment or different initiatives, and then ask school districts to implement them without giving the funding to do that, that then also comes out of the general fund. Some big ones that you can see there is classified unemployment. There was a new legislation that now allows any classified staff member to claim unemployment during winter break, spring break, and summer, even if they're still employed by the district. So if they're not working during that time, they claim unemployment, which is portions then that we have to pay into. And again, no one's saying this isn't helpful or needed or a long time coming. It's just districts didn't expect that they were going to be the ones to have to pay for this without additional compensation from the state. Paid Leave Oregon, again, a very worthy initiative, which now allows employees to take 12 weeks of paid leave every year. This is in addition to if they qualify for FEMLA or OFLA. This is not instead of, it's in addition to that. And that paid leave is paid a little bit by the district, a little bit by employees. We've all heard about the program, but where the costs are for the district is in substitutes, because as more people tap into this, the district is now covering employees who are not teaching in the classroom or working. Again, a very worthy initiative. No one's arguing that. It's just the cost now to cover for employees who are not working was unexpected and an unfunded mandate. And then I'm not going to talk about energy efficiency lighting, but there's requirements there that every school district in Oregon has to now move towards, and it's quite exorbitant. So just a little bit about the PERS rates increases. You can again go on the internet, Google it. You'll read far more comprehensive information than you'll receive tonight if you're watching. But essentially you can see in that top row that our rates for tier 1, tier 2 employees are going from 7.92% to 16%. And our OPSERC employees, their rate is going up from 5.808 to 12.83. So you can see that it's actually a little bit more than doubling those rates. For our district alone, this expenditure unexpectedly is $6 million more for next year. I just put in a few other school districts that are in Clackamas County, but you can get, every school district. You'll also see rates are going up for police, law enforcement, firefighters. And you can see just highlighted a few: Canby, Gladstone, Lake Oswego, North Clackamas, but there's about 127 school districts and all of their rates are going up, most doubling, if not more, for next year. Now, if we didn't have any side accounts, our rates will actually be closer to about 27%. But our Chief Financial Officer, Dr. Hughes, has over time put us into a pool with other school districts, and we've qualified for what's called side accounts. Essentially, those operate, let's say if you had a credit card and it was at 15% and you went out for a loan for 7%, you could pay off your credit card at 50, that has a higher rate, and then just pay your loan at 7. So this is what school districts can do. If we can pool together and get a side account or a loan at a lower rate, then we use that money then is given to PERS to draw down the amount we have to pay otherwise. The reason 127 of our school districts have gone up now is that a side account that we were all in that's set to expire in 2027 is essentially, there's actuarials that put out, how much it'll last each year. It's actually drawn down in that bucket more than it has. And so they're slowing down the payout and raising our rates. So our rate will go up again in 2027 when the side account actually does expire. We do have another side account that we took out in about 2021. And so that's where we saw some relief during COVID by taking out a side account there. So we actually have 2 side accounts. One will expire in 2027. We are exploring with other school districts if we can qualify for another side account. The challenge is around the economics. It doesn't work if you can't get a rate that's beneficial or that's lower than the PERS rate. Otherwise, you're spending more money to take out that loan. So you have to factor in the risk factors, and there are financial analysts and groups that are working on that for a group of school districts and running those numbers. So just a review of kind of where we've been. In 23-24, I did provide a message to the budget committee, to the community, the board, that just forecasted we are getting to a place where, again, costs are going up, revenue is going down, and our federal our reserve of funds from the pandemic, that cushion in reserve, is getting depleted. And so it's kind of like the cliff is coming, which is what they're calling in the media, the ESSER cliff, the pandemic cliff. And we need to plan ahead and know that we need to make some significant reductions. In that year of 23-24, we did some modest reductions. Some of them were around things that you wouldn't ordinarily see, some supplies, slight changes to some programs. We did reduce our health assistants who we had hired for the pandemic. But we still had such a robust ending fund balance that was really hard to make any other types of significant reductions with that type of an ending fund balance. In 24-25, going into this year, last spring, I once again sent messages out to the community, to the budget committee, district staff, letting them know that we are even closer to that cliff, that waterfall, and that we will need to reduce $10 million going into the 24-25 school year. We were in the middle of contract negotiations with both of our associations. They were fantastic partners through those difficult conversations, and we were able to successfully negotiate those. You may hear that other school districts from last year still have not, and they're in mediation this year. But I want to thank our associations for collaborating through that process. Reductions were made, and we communicated those out to the community through letters, the website, budget message. There were a number of media reports. And the next slide shows where we made those reductions. in 24-25. I apologize for that orange font. So the first says approximately 4.5 million. So district-wide across departments and the school operational budget, we made a reduction there of 4.5 million. Then we did another reduction of 4 million around personnel across the district. These are non-classroom personnel, so a lot of support personnel, some administrators, some administrative positions, classified support staff. And we were able to, by that time, be a little more specific in what those positions were going to be, and you can see those listed there. And then, so that was the 8.5 million of the 10. And then there were 12 classroom teacher reductions in primary. It's where we had our most significant enrollment drop, but we had held to still quite a few staff to have very low class sizes and support students coming out of the pandemic. So by reducing those 12 primary teachers, we went from an average of about 21.3 students into a classroom to 23.3. So here we are looking at 25-26. And we are in this situation of revenue is not keeping up to pace. It's also declining for us when we're declining our enrollment. And we need to make another sizable reduction in staff and programs. We have been working, we know there's some comments around maybe a third-party business analyst could be helping the district business office. And actually we do. We have a lot of, on a regular basis, a lot of people looking at our financials, whether it's our debt service, whether it's our property tax, our local option tax. And we do have on retainer a third-party business analyst who has been a CFO in school districts, and now his career is to go around and help school districts who are working on their budgets or who have challenges with their budgets. And he has reviewed our analysis for going also into next year. So as I mentioned last year, the majority of our reductions went towards non-classroom positions and programs. We did as much as we could around looking at where and who and how we could reduce without touching the classroom. For a district our size, that's pretty challenging. We pride ourselves on being a little as slim as possible in terms of administrative support and things like that, but we were able to trim down 8.5 million. This year, the reductions, we will still make some at the district level, but frankly, we're getting at a point where you could only trim down so much before you're actually eliminating perhaps whole programs. I think this just means we need to move around. Thank you, Jared. So this year we will make approximately 50% to non-classroom positions still, but a few more to classroom positions. Can you hear me okay? Is it better? Okay. And again, just want to assure our school board that we are working very closely with our association leaders around all preliminary numbers and of course, all processes, just like we did last year. Okay, next. So what I'm going to show you tonight is a draft of our general budget reduction plan that we're going to work with going into next year. The reason I'm sharing it tonight, it feels early because it's only January, but we know that you have a lot to think about in terms of the timeline for small schools. And your questions would be around, what are we looking at for budget? So we've kind of accelerated the process a little bit so that you would have a starting point for this evening and for your decision on the 27th. I can't emphasize that first bullet point enough. This draft is preliminary. So any media reporting tonight, put the word preliminary in your article. It is only January and a lot can change in the life of school districts and funding between now and June. First of all, it's preliminary, it's only January because legislators are just now starting to draft bills, getting ready to meet. The Ways and Means Committee still gets to decide if it wants to keep the governor's proposal of 11.36 billion, raise it or lower it. So Again, advocacy around that would really be helpful. And legislators are just starting to draft bills. We are hoping that if they make any that require school districts to make changes, that they would fund any mandates that come with those. As those unfunded mandates do make it difficult for us to keep consistent with initiatives that we're doing in our schools. Next. Again, this draft is preliminary because revenue and costs can still change. We do get varying numbers from the federal government around our special education IDEA and title grants. Last year, they went down significantly. When we inquired, it was because the federal government has moved towards a new methodology of determining poverty using census data and what's called a neighborhood census versus individual census to allocate that funding. So this resulted in less funding for us as a district. Some other school districts maybe fared better, but our school district did not based on the new methodology. Also, that SIA grant that I mentioned and the high school success grant and the early literacy grants, those are estimates. And once the allocation and distribution formula is determined, each school district will find out how much of each of those grants they receive. Other than the high school success grant, the SIA grant and the early literacy grants are based on demographics, so weighted students. So that changes for us. The high school success grant is per student. It's about $800 per student in high school, regardless the demographics of the school district. And then, of course, we have these preliminary numbers from utility, insurance, and vendor costs. We're working with those as estimates, but we don't know in the end until we get closer to August, September, and get into those months what it will be. Next. The draft is preliminary because you've also not made any decision, but you will in the next few weeks. You'll be directing the staff, letting us know if there are any changes that you want us to make to the number of schools that we have. And then once we know some of that information, we can adjust accordingly. If there is more revenue actualized for 25-26 from the Ways and Means Committee or from funding advocates or legislators, then of course we will go back to what we're going to show you tonight and we make those adjustments. We know from our community that lower class sizes is a priority. It always shows up as the #1 priority when we do our budget survey. That survey goes out to, I think, well over 1,000 people took it last year. And once again, lower class sizes showed up as the highest priority. So when we look at what we're going to look at pretty soon here, just know that should more revenue come through, lower class sizes will be a priority. Or some staff connected to some programs that we felt we had to suspend, but maybe we could bring back. And then, of course, we're always thinking about how do we keep some in our ending fund balance. Ending fund balance is important in case something happens during the year and you need additional money to meet payroll or to deal with some type of crisis that occurred financially. The draft does not include any financials from the sale of Opperland or property. That's a decision you're still working through as a board with the city of West Linn. And until there's something finalized there, there's nothing to put in our financials or an account. And we do know from you as a board that you are going out potentially for a capital bond in November of 2025. You're doing this long range plan, perhaps a bond summit in March, depending on the outcome of the bond. That could impact also what I'm about to show. So again, this is preliminary. We are looking next year at a $15 million reduction. Again, we're taking as sizable of a portion at district level and non-school reductions. You can see some examples there that are broad. Unlike the slide before, we cannot share specifics in January that wouldn't be identifiable to someone seeing on the screen their specific position. being eliminated. So in time, these will become more specific as to which support staff and programs, which operations and services, which classified, which administrator. So as we are able to get more specific and work with our unions and associations, those will become more known. And then in terms of classroom reductions, oh, excuse me, that is a significant typo. It should say classroom reductions and then not have that parentheses, non-classroom. So any media here, Mac, make sure you got that. And I will fix that. So that these are classroom reductions. We're looking at primary, middle, and high school. Remembering that our most significant drop has still been in our primary around enrollment. High school has held kind of steady. Middle school has started to drop, but as smaller fifth grade classes move into middle and high school, we will start to see enrollment decline in middle and high school over the next decade. And Flow Analytics has that in their report. Right now, the largest decline is still in elementary, but that will move across. This leaves our ending fund balance with $2 million. And if we don't need that $1 million contingency that's built in, that would be about $3 million. That is well below any recommendation for an ending fund balance. OSBA recommends 5 to 8% ending fund balance. GFOA recommends 5 to 15% or 2 months of payroll. We're looking at about 1-2%. One of the reasons I feel that we can move in the next couple years with a lower ending fund balance is that with the sale of Oppenlander, that asset then goes into our land account. It's unencumbered and it can serve as a contingency. So if we do get to a place where we go below our ending fund balance, the board could make a decision around using that land reserve, whatever that number is that Oppenlander sells for, in addition to, we've got a couple million in there right now. It can act also as a contingency to get us through these next few years and hopefully a stronger biennium than what we're seeing so far. So this is probably the hardest few months that I've had to go through as a superintendent in terms of really looking at the numbers, looking them over again. Our CFO has worked countless hours. As I mentioned, we have had other business analysts look at it and concur. And in fact, the one who did come in is working with several school districts around some of the same things that we're looking at. And so he's doing the same kind of analyzing of revenue and expenditure in other school districts that are also looking at significant reductions. I think we all heard with equal shock around our neighboring school district that had to make a similar amount reduction. They are a little smaller than us. So I think this is what we're going to be hearing over the next weeks and months. I can't emphasize enough the important work that Director Vidal and Director Sloop are doing around advocacy, attending some of those sessions, know who your state representatives are and your legislators. And so I'll also be attending on Wednesday up there at Harmony campus. And the more collective messaging we can do to Salem around raising the special education cap, funding high cost disability. If there's an appetite in Salem to fund higher than 11.36, that would be enormously helpful to school districts. So while we have this space and time where we're going to talk about small schools and things we're doing here, this is it's nested in a bigger complication across Oregon. And we may be one of the few looking at perhaps consolidating schools as some sort of mitigation towards this trend. Or you may choose, not to. But I think in time, there may be other school districts that just have to have these same types of conversations we're having around where else can we make reductions. And in making those reductions, consolidate resources so that we can keep class sizes where they need to be. Later this evening, you will hear about the options in front of you around consolidation, and you'll see another slide similar to this one, which will show what would happen if we consolidated a school. This just doesn't show that. Next slide. So we're going to keep monitoring our enrollment. We're going to keep advocating and paying attention around legislation, discouraging any unfunded mandates. You have, of course, some other large factors, the sale of Oppenlander and then this capital bond that do have impacts on our budget and our funding in our district. So thank you. I know that was an extended report, but it will make the presentation later this evening go a little shorter because this would otherwise have been nested in that report. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Next up, we have our consent agenda. Do we have a motion on the consent agenda?
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Killstrom, can you call the vote, please?
Chair Taylor,
Aye.
Vice Chair Wyatt,
Aye.
Director Shoemaker,
Aye.
Director Sloop,
Aye.
Director Vidal.
Aye.
Thanks.
Next up on our agenda is our board business reports. And first up, we have a report from our Department of Operations. It's our Long-Range Planning Committee presentation of the Small School Task Force Findings Report. And so we welcome Pat McGuff to the mic.
Thank you. Thank you. The board has already received the first part of the Small Schools Task Force report. And tonight we have one of our Long-Range Planning Committee members, Ryan Ingersoll, is going to formally present it to the board.
Good evening. You previously received the report, so I'm not passing a big binder to you, but you've received that via email. After the Long Range Planning Committee reviewed and read the report, we met and wrote the following statement to be shared with you today. The Long Range Planning Committee of the West Linn-Wilsonville School District appreciates the time, contributions, and work of the community and the Small Schools Task Force. The Long Range Planning Committee reviewed, analyzed, and carefully discussed all of the information we received. Based on the following factors and the limited purview of the committee, the Long Range Planning Committee is not making a recommendation regarding the consolidation of West Linn primary schools. We would encourage the West Linn-Wilsonville School District Board Directors to consider the following 4 things: the Small Schools Task Force report and the appendices, enrollment trends, facility equity, maintenance, and stewardship, and the interaction between the general fund budget and capital improvement plan. The Long Range Planning Committee also notes the community appetite for the continuation of the bond summit process with the current 16 schools in our district. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. That concludes this report.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the school board? Sure.
So as the liaison for the Long Range Planning Committee, I want to thank the committee for their work and their ongoing work, because this this small schools task force report was just a piece of this ongoing work they're doing. I also want to note of the just how much time they talked about stewardship and have talked about stewardship, the responsibility that we all have to all of our schools. And there are just so many different ways that folks are looking at that, but there's a lot that falls under that umbrella of stewardship. And I appreciate that commitment to that in particular. So thank you.
All right, moving on, we have the district staff presentation of additional information on small schools, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Ludwig.
Thank you. So if you think about your years when you're on the budget committee and before you make any decision about the budget, you're given a lot of information, then you have about 2 weeks to work through it and then deliberate and make a decision. So we're kind of, this will follow that pattern. You're going to receive a lot of information tonight, much you've already received, but staff also has a presentation, some analysis that we've done. We're going to walk through some of it in more detail, and others we're just going to share with you what's in that section so you can read it on your own. It's pretty self-explanatory. Knowing that if you have questions or need some clarity, you can contact us in the next 2 weeks. We would also say any questions you have or additional information you want, you could email and we could put some supplemental material together and make sure you get that. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with perhaps if my colleagues here can pass out these binders. You will get this presentation electronically, but I will tell you we were still editing as of even an hour, before this meeting. So get comfortable. You could slide your laptops up. You could move some of your tokens from children and schools down onto the floor. And we're going to just let you know what's in these binders and what you have in terms of information to help you with the decision ahead. Again, I want to thank, while you're getting acclimated there, as several of you have, want to thank the Small Schools Task Force. What an incredible group of parents, very committed in their amount of time, curious, dedicated. I hope a number of them consider being on some district committees. The budget committee has 2 openings. Long Range Planning Committee often has openings, school board openings. Just the caliber of this group of individuals was fantastic. I want to thank the Long Range Planning Committee. Thank you, Ryan, for being here on their behalf and speaking for them. They are busy still putting together that long range plan. They meet this week looking at, again, some capital project drafts. So they're busy working on that plan. I want to thank our PTAs and PTOs for hosting the listening sessions, for attending also. Many of them attended the engagement forums. So I thank our PTO and PTSA leaders, as well as all the parents who showed up to the engagement sessions, the town hall, and those board hosted listening sessions. I want to thank 3J Consulting for very short notice coming in and facilitating. I want to thank the district staff who did a lot of work with gathering information and putting together reports for the Small Schools Task Force. And of course, the communities of the 3 schools for engaging so deeply and so genuinely and representing their school communities so beautifully. And of course, you, our board. So when you open the binder, we're just going to kind of walk through. I know this is when you get that book, you kind of want to jump to the last chapter or in the middle, but you will have that opportunity to go through it on your own. We're just going to walk through some things so that you can see why there's a table here or a figure there or what the numbers mean. The first 3 pages at the very beginning, and thank you. So this is, those of you at home and in the audience can see what the board is seeing up on the screen. And again, this presentation will be available electronically at the end of the evening or tomorrow as soon as we can get it up. But again, we were just, rechecking numbers and doing final edits right before this meeting. The first 3 pages really just sets the context. This does become an anchor document used over time. So it does set the context for what got us here, the study of the small schools, why those 3 were looked at. And then if you look at page 2, after it talks about the Small Schools Task Force report, the role of the Long Range Planning Committee to deliver that, which Ryan did tonight, and then now turning it over to you as a board to make a decision. The rest of this memo really is outlining the sections that you'll have of information available to you in this binder. Okay, so it kind of serves as an index for you, a table of contents. And you can see section 1 will be the context for small schools considerations. Section 2, some of the research on small schools and consolidations. Section 3, analysis of the 3 smallest schools in West Linn. We're going to be mostly talking about section 3 tonight because it has the most charts and graphs. Page 3, you can see some of those categories in there. Section 4, about the budget. Because I presented quite a bit in my superintendent report, this will be a little slimmer. And then section 5 is the Long Range Planning Committee's statement, which you received tonight. Section 6 is the Small Schools Task Force report of findings, which you already had electronically, but it's here also for you in hard copy with a lot of things printed out to make it easy for you. And then section 7, other community feedback. You got a lot of emails from community members. Sometimes we got one saying, pass this along. Those are the ones in here. Ones that you got, you already have, they're in your system. They're in your database. We didn't duplicate those, but these are ones we weren't sure if you had ever received them. So there are a few at the back under this section called other community feedback. Okay. But ones that came to board meetings or came to directed to all of you, you already have those in your system. So we're going to start with section 1. Again, we're not going to go through every page. But if you look at starting on page 5, this portion of information really builds the context for how did we get into this situation where we have declining enrollment and budget challenges. Much of what I presented tonight is also written in here, so I'm not going to go over it, but it just builds the narrative. It gives the story, the chapter 1, so to speak, and also creates an anchor document for someone who might download this presentation and not have heard anything else before. That table in the middle just really fundamentally shows that our largest buckets of revenue, state school fund and local property tax, aren't able to keep pace right now with our largest expenditure, which is personnel. 85% of the school budget is staff. And so when there's a big gap there, that's the one we're trying to close. There are, of course, other revenue sources and other expenditures, but we wanted to show some of the larger ones. Moving on, pages 6 and 7 talk about the enrollment trend. You have the full flow analytics report that you'll be able to go through, but we've just pulled out a few of the numbers again to explain how we got to where we are. Page 8 and 9 provide for you links where you can see articles around budget challenges nationally, statewide, neighboring school districts. If you feel you want to learn more about who else is in the same dilemma, you'll see a lot of school districts listed and budget challenges that they're going through. Page 10 talks about Oregon's budget challenge and why sometimes it's unique as a state because we have Measure 5 and Measure 50. So prior to those two measures in the mid-90s, a large part of school funding was local. Those two measures, along with the school funding equalization legislation, now put 70% of the onus on state funding, income tax, and 30% from local property tax. That change, along with Measure 5 and 50, which limited how much local tax could be collected, does create a dilemma in Oregon around money that they receive from taxes for schools. So when you limit how much you can collect in taxes, you have less than to distribute. Page 11 shows you the same document that I showed everyone in the community tonight around how the biennium allocation from the state has in the past kept up with cost of living increases or inflation. But since COVID and going forward and the rise of inflation and costs and payroll, that same percentage is not enough anymore and should be closer to 15% increase if we really want to match what's happening, but it's not. And then page 12 just ends that summary. So that's section 1. I think you're pretty versed on it. We've been talking about this for months, but anyone who downloads this presentation will have that background. Section 2, you'll do a lot of reading on your own if you're interested. Also in the very back of the binder, some of the articles are printed out for you. But in section 2, there was research that we included for you around small schools and consolidation. You'll see that we actually open with this statement that ever since No Child Left Behind and ESSA, school districts are accountable to money following outcomes for students. So whereas years ago, districts could make changes and you had some very inequitable looking situations, one school right next to another that looked very completely different. That's just not where school districts are today, that there is expectation around accountability for outcomes, federal money that then follows those outcomes, and sanctions to districts and withholding of money if districts are not keeping up with academic outcomes and parity. So that change that's happened since the early mid 2000s has really changed the landscape in terms of school closures or consolidations or reorganizational structures of school districts. The research around school closures is challenging to find. A lot of it's actually referring to the pandemic and temporary closure and the impacts, but permanent closures, there is research. I will say a lot of it centers around urban school districts or where there has been gentrification or what's been termed as white flight, where school districts had to make some closures or significant budget challenges and the negative impacts on particularly minority students, African-American, Latino students. So the article that you have in here is kind of a synopsis of many articles, but again, there are links that you can access and the outcomes and the effects are mixed. What you will hear in terms of a trend is if schools going from a closed school, if students going from a closed school can attend a school that's also high performing, that the results are more positive. And in terms of then the resource allocation that follows them. So those are just things you'll want to keep in mind if that's something you're considering. And then we end that section with just letting you know there are other school districts that have closed schools. And how are they faring post those decisions? Probably our closest neighboring school district that we've asked a lot of questions of and looked closest to is Lake Oswego, which did close 3 schools, but there are a few others mentioned in here. Okay. The section we're going to talk the most about now is section 3. So section 5, 6, and 7, we won't talk about. So we're going to do the bulk of this presentation will be section 3. And then just a little bit of section 4, which is around budget, but I've talked a lot already about that. And so it'll go a little more quickly. And with that, I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. David Pryor, our Assistant Superintendent of Primary Schools, who's been very involved with this process and made himself very available also to a lot of questions and the engagement forums and to our PTA leaders and staff.
Thank you, Dr. Ludwig. And as Kathy said, we are going to dwell a little more in this section, and my colleagues will jump in to either hurry me along or to revise or add information, because we do want this to be helpful and clear, and it's meant to be background information to help you in your deliberations. It begins with this question that we started with the Long Range Planning Committee around what do we mean by a small school? And we know from many community meetings that that class size is one of the most important priorities of our district, as well as smaller school communities where people can know each other and feel really connected. We as a district have had a long history of looking at that 400 to 550 student capacity in our design of schools. And we do have experience with a school larger than that, because as I think you all know, at one point, Boone's Ferry was built with an intentional capacity of 775 students. And after several years of operation, we were hearing from the community and staff that they preferred a smaller school community. And so we thereafter worked to reduce the size of that school and worked with all of our schools, even our new school design, to be ultimately within that 400 to 550 capacity range. So, the question that has arisen is more recently due to enrollment decline is, what is too small for a school? And as Dr. Ludwig mentioned, there is no defining research that gives you a cutoff. But we did want to share with you some things that we consider as we think around staffing and supporting schools as they start to get below that number. And I do want to reiterate, it's not a magic cutoff number, but here are some things that we do experience. The first thing is that there are fewer classrooms for students and teachers. And so one way that might play out is every year we work really hard to project enrollment to try to keep class sizes within the ranges that we hear from our community are strong for students. If we've only got, an example would be when class size due to enrollment starts to rise, if we have 2 classes of 25 for kindergarten, we would begin to think, let's add a classroom to bring that class size down. With 2 classes, when you add a third, now you're looking at class sizes of 16 or 17, which would be unsustainable to do across the district. So we look at alternate, ways of doing that. But if you've got 4 classrooms of 25, and then you make another classroom for 5, now you're looking at class sizes of 20, which becomes on the low end, but more sustainable. It's just one example of the challenges that you have when you don't have many classrooms. You also have the issue of creating, you just have less classroom for students to be placed in. School leaders reach out to parents every year in the spring to get feedback on how to create classrooms that are balanced. And when you've got more classrooms, you can distribute students with different skills, attributes, learning needs across classrooms so each one is balanced. And sometimes you do, due to a variety of factors, have students that thrive better when they're not together. And so the more options you have to place students, the more options you have to create strong friendships. So that's one thing that we do learn about. The second is when a school reaches a certain size of smallness, we have to start looking at part-time support staff. We do have many amazing specialists in our district whose role is different than that of a classroom teacher. They might be a music teacher, a wellness teacher, a teacher librarian, a learning specialist. And if their caseload does not qualify them to be in a school full-time, then they're shared between buildings, which can create some staffing challenges to the point where, even they're not in a building every single day, but they're spread across multiple buildings. We also have an additional challenge where we depend heavily upon teacher leadership in helping design and run the school, and teachers serve on committees like equity committees or curriculum adoption committees. And it's important to have teachers from each building and each grade level help represent those committees. And once the school gets to a certain size, you end up calling upon the same people frequently. We also, we've heard so much feedback around how much parents prefer smaller school communities. We also hear feedback sometimes of parents who, for a variety of factors, might choose to transfer out of a smaller school if they're seeking additional friendships or a school community that has a wider range of opportunity. So we do sometimes hear, or the data supports that there are transfers out, which you may see in some later data that we're going to show tonight also. So those are noted in here, and this was presented to our long-range planning committee months ago. It may sound familiar. We have also heard and asked from the community to consider the history of our schools. So we're so fortunate to have schools with histories that are over 100 years old and have been in different buildings with the same name. And so we have tried to compile some data around the Bolton Primary School, Cedar Oak Primary School, and Stafford Primary School to provide you that historical context of our schools. So the next chart is trying to give some data to describe the three small schools that we have been discussing. If you can scroll down to the chart, thank you. So the first line is 2023-24 actual enrollment for Bolton, Cedar Oak, and Stafford. And that's pretty self-explanatory. That is actual enrollment. The next line is the resident count. These are the number of students who live in the boundary who could potentially go to that school. But not all those students do attend the school. Not all those students even do attend school in our district. So this is more like census data around who lives in that boundary. The next line that says resident students attending, that is, the number of students that we know live in the boundary, how many of those students actually attend. So you can see, for example, if we were to look at, the last column, Stafford, you've got 300, you've got 305 students, plus you've got students in the choice zone for a total of 364. 87% of those students actually attend Stafford. And the next two lines are about transfers. I always have to remind myself which is which. Intra is within the district. So these are students who live somewhere in the district, boundary for another school, but who attend each school. So for Bolton, it's 29 students, or 12.5% of their school population. Inter-district are students who have transferred from outside the district, so from another school district. So you have Bolton also has 29. That's confusing because it's 29 for both, but 29 students who have come from outside the district. So that's for 22-23. And then
24.
I'm sorry, 23-24. Thank you. The next blue line begins to give a lot of that same data for 24-25. And so you can see here, we actually have the projected enrollment based on the Flow Analytics middle scenario for each school. Because we are in 24-25, we're also able to give you the actual enrollment. And I would say that enrollment is always fluctuating. So someone watching online who may have data from this morning may know a difference of 1 or 2 students, but it allows you to compare current enrollment to the projected enrollment for the school. The next page, top of 21, here's where we start looking at next year, projected enrollment based on the Flow Analytics middle scenario for Bolton, Cedar Oak, and Stafford. We also are able to show you how we typically forecast for enrollment as we begin to make staffing decisions, so you can compare those numbers. So what we do is we have this year's current enrollment. We know all the 5th graders are leaving. So we take the 5th graders out of that enrollment. And then we look at our current kindergarten and we say, what if that class was exactly the same? Because it's usually pretty close. So we take out the 5th grade, we add in a new kindergarten class based on the current class, and we get this number of 194 for Bolton, 332 for Cedar Oak, and 277 for Stafford. That ends the enrollment part. The next line is around the facility capacity. And this gives you data that you may have previously seen of the building enrollment capacity that has been computed by our operations department. The current capacity usage, so how much of the building is currently being used, and the number of K-5 classrooms used out of the total. We should note that that number in these schools, we do plan for preschool. And so there is 1 additional classroom. So Bolton, for example, has 20 classrooms, but in here we've taken 1 out for preschool and said 10 of the 19 classes are currently being used. A very brief summary of some property features is in the next section, so you get a sense of how large the property size is, any unique features to that school, and some of the basic site features in the next row. And then as part of the Small Schools Task Force, we were asked to break down future renovation plans into 3 categories, which we call mission critical, mission important, and those that might be deferrable. So you can get a sense of the cost of those projects for each of the 3 schools. So that takes us to the top of page 22, section D. Georgetown University, in collaboration with other universities, has created what they call edunomics. It's the economics of educational organizations. And what they do is they draw data from the Oregon Department of Education for our particular state to create some coefficients based on spending versus outcomes of schools. And this is some interesting data. You should note that all 3 of our small schools are performing above average in performance, but they did have varying spending allocations. And so you can see, a rank order of the cost per student for all the schools in the district, both primary, middle, and high, and how the small schools rate in terms of, what we're currently spending.
22, 23.
Thank you, Kathy, for 22-23 school year, because that's where we have the most accurate data from Oregon Department of Education. Part of your deliberations, we were sure would also be geographical. So we did include at the top of page 23 a map of the district, these Westland schools. So you can see each school's boundary is color coded. Bolton is on the northeast side of the district, and they're the cream colored shading. Cedar Oak is on the northeast side of the district. It's the grass green colored, and Stafford is north centrally located. Stafford, as you know, includes its own zone. It also includes a choice zone. And so there are 2 zones that feed into Stafford. The choice zone also chews into Beckman Creek. Students are able to choose which school that they would attend. Moving on to page 23, below the map, we just wanted to remind you, and this was referenced earlier.
Page 23.
Yeah, thank you. That it's important to note that there are both resident students attending school as well as non-resident students. And the non-resident students attend school based on approved inter-district and inter-district transfers. So should a school consolidate, this would mean that resident and non-resident students would shift to new schools. The non-resident students would either return to their resident school, or they could apply to transfer to the newly assigned school or another school. The resident students would be assigned to their new boundaried school. So the next section starts to shift into some more graphs, and this is around enrollment and capacity available for each school. So the tables that we're about to show projects the enrollment at each school for the 25-26 school year, based on Flow Analytics middle projections. And they show you the building capacity for additional students. We should also note that the school board's decision on December 6th to delay the opening of Frog Pond until 2026 impacts capacity available at that location until it opens. So it will not be available in our capacity charts. So if we shift down to the first chart that you'll see coming up, what you'll see is, first of all, for each school, you'll see enrollment in the first column. If you could scroll, bring that chart up into the middle of the screen, please. Yeah. Thank you. And so, for example, on the first line, you'll see Beckman Creek enrollment for 25-26 projected at 496 students. And then if you move over for Beckman to the next column, you'll see it has a capacity of 550 students. minus the projected enrollment to give you a capacity of 54 students. So we've done that for each school to show you what the capacity is. And then the schools in West Linn are the ones in yellow toward the bottom half of the chart. You can see in that third column, for example, for Bolton, has 212 students enrolled. And then for capacity, you've got a capacity of 475 minus those 212 for 263 students. That would be for 25-26 school year. We also put in, based on the flow analytics middle projection, 2033-34, what the capacity would look like, so that you can think down the road as you're looking at the available capacity for each school building. So we took those numbers, and the next section is purely just mathematical opportunity for different options that the board may or may not consider. And the options are named kind of based on the description of the option. So option none, that option would be to leave all 6 West Linn primary schools open and no consolidations. And it is possible, as you can see from the capacity of their current schools, for the district to leave all 6 primary schools in West Linn as they are. There will be ample capacity at each school building for enrollment growth over the next decade. Option 1, and it's called 1 because it's meant to describe consolidating one school for 2025-26. So this is simply there space for students to consolidate a school. So the top blue row shows the current enrollment, or the projected enrollment for next year for each school. So for Bolton, it's 212, Cedar Oak 330, Stafford 319. And then it looks at just mathematically the available capacity in all the other schools that students would reasonably go to. And so in the first column, you can see Cedar Oak has a capacity of 170, Sunset 36, Trillium 85, Linn at 137. So there's a mathematical capacity of 428 to place those 212 students. And so it's simply showing a comparison of number of students that would need to be relocated and capacity in schools where they might reasonably attend. We've done that for all 3 schools. So the conclusion of this math is that it is possible in 25-26 for the district to consolidate one primary school. Resident students from that school would attend the closest school as part of the new boundary. And that takes us to option 2 on page 25, which is to consolidate 2 small schools, one in 25-26 and the second in 26-27. I would remind you again that in 26-27, there would be capacity at Frog Pond, so that that has a impact on this plan. So here's where we looked at all 3 different combinations, because with 3 small schools, you can have 3 different combinations if we were to consolidate 2 of them. And we look at the enrollment of all 3 of those combinations. So the first column is the enrollment needs. If Bolton and Cedar Oak were schools that were not open, we would have 554 students that we needed to find homes for. And the next one is Bolton and Stafford, will be 531 students, and Cedar Oak at Stafford, which would be 649 students. And then we looked at the capacity. So if you look at the first column, you've got in the first row 542 students that we would need to find a placement for. And then the available capacity of the remaining schools, Stafford, Sunset, Trillium, and Willamette, is 464 students. So you've got an enrollment need which exceeds capacity. So you can see that comparison for all 3 scenarios. Frog Pond does become open in the fall of 2026. So if you look 2 years down the road, you do start to see a shift in capacity. So the conclusion of this one is that it is not possible for the district to consolidate 2 of the small schools in the same year, because in all the scenarios, the enrollment needs exceed the capacity. However, the district could consolidate 1 primary school in 25-26 and a second primary school in 26-27. If scenario B were the decision, then Stafford Primary School would need to be the consolidated school in 26-27 so that Frog Pond Primary could help accommodate its students. The consolidated primary school in 25-26 would either be Bolton or Cedar Oak. It is not possible for the 2 schools to be Bolton and Cedar Oak Park. Frog Pond and Beckman Creek are needed in this scenario to provide available capacity, which is the most realistic for Stafford. So again, a reminder, this is simply mathematical capacities that we're describing here. Did you say that?
I called it C.
Oh.
Should say option 2.
Option B, thank you.
Option
Yeah.
2, option 2.
Option 2, yeah, I made a mistake. I could call it, I got a typo. We called this scenario B, but this is option 2. Thank you, Dr. Ludwig. Option 3 is consolidating all 3 schools into neighboring schools in 25-26. Again, we simply looked at the enrollment needs of all 3 schools in the first column for a total of 861. The available capacity in all the remaining schools is 312. So the mathematical conclusion, it is not possible in the short term or the next 10 years to close all 3 schools in Westland at the same time. There's not enough capacity in the remaining Westland schools, Beckman Creek, or even with the opening of Frog Pond. Therefore, option 3 is not an option. So in conclusion, only options none, 1, and 2 are viable for the school board to consider mathematically. With options 1 and 2, should either of these options be selected by the board, there would be an immediate process for boundary adjustment in order to provide critical information to families, staff, and district operations as soon as possible for planning toward 25-26 school year. In the next section, Pat McGuff is going to take on to describe boundary adjustment process and impacts.
Thank you, Dr. Pryor. I'll try and move this up a little closer. There we go. So section F is boundary adjustments and the process and the impacts. District staff does respectfully request that any school consolidation or not for the fall of 2025 be decided January 27th at the board meeting. There are a series of planning and operational processes that we will need to perform, and they need to occur right away so we can get the information out to parents before families leave for the summer. The next chart that you see there is kind of a timeline on what is required, both if there are no consolidations of schools. That's a pretty normal year. I'll quickly go through that. We begin our budget reductions, both phase 1 and phase 2 in February. In March, we continue with the phase 2 budget reductions and we begin to notify personnel. April, we continue that process. May, staff transitions, their activities are planned and the district budget committee, of course, begins to receive proposals on the budget. And then in June, when at the end of the school year, empty classrooms are packed up, the budget is adopted and we're closed for the summer. However, if there is a consolidation of a school, that whole timeline changes for district staff. We, district and Flow Analytics, begin to create boundary adjustment maps so we can get them out to families. First student works on their new bus routes. special closure and transition activities planned by the schools, by school staff and PTO for students. And we began those early budget reductions similarly to the no closure. In March, family and students would tour their new schools. Transfer requests are open. We begin to adjust staff based on their request for placement assignments. And of course, we're all the time continuing the budget reductions in phase 2. In April, student transfers closed and staff assignments are finalized. And the budget, of course, continues. May, the student and staff transition activities that are planned, class placement input forms are generated. And we're in the final stages of the budget document. And then in June, should we consolidate any schools, there will undoubtedly be special end of year and school legacy celebrations, empty classrooms packed up and teachers perhaps transferred. And of course, the budget is adopted. There would be there would be a different process for the boundary adjustments, depending on which option is selected. So we've identified the boundary adjustment for option 2. That is to close 2 schools, one in 2025, 2026, and the second one in 26, 27. If 2 schools are determined to be consolidated, then Bolton or Cedar Oak would be consolidated in 2025, 2026. The new boundaries would be determined and communicated right away due to the remaining short timeline for reassignment of students, staff, bus routes, school tours, etc. Non-resident students would return to their resident school unless they apply for a transfer to another school. Inter-district transfer students would apply for a new transfer. Resident students would be assigned to their new boundary. Any adjustment in the boundary would have to be amended in subsequent years. In the 2025-2026 school year, a boundary process could be put in place to prepare for consolidation of Stafford and the opening of Frog Pond for the following 26-27 school year. The choice zone would largely be eliminated and absorbed in assigned to Frog Pond. Non-resident students at Stafford would return to their resident school unless they applied for another transfer. Inter-district transfer students would apply for a new transfer as well. Resident students would be assigned their new boundary. So the second option is a boundary adjustment for option 1, only one school closing. If one school is determined to be consolidated in 25-26, new boundaries would be determined and communicated right away due to the remaining short timeline for reassignment of students, staff, bus routes, school tours, etc. Non-resident students, intra-district, would return to their resident school unless they applied for a transfer to another school. Inter-district students transfers would have to apply for a new transfer. Resident students would be assigned their new boundary. Choice zones will essentially go away. The current district choice zones allow some families to choose between 2 schools and receive bus transportation. In the fall of 2025, the district will discontinue the choice zone boundary, except for the Beckman Stafford choice zone due to the delay of Frog Pond. The students residing in their primary school boundaries will be assigned middle schools and high schools unless they receive an approved in-district transfer request. When Frog Pond opens in the fall of 26, the Beckman and Stafford choice zones will dissolve, and that area will be designated primarily into the Frog Pond boundary. During the boundary process, it may be determined that some portions will remain in the Beckman zone. So the next is a map of the current school boundaries, and the Beckman Stafford choice zone is in the pink, almost in the center here. And the table that follows this map, if you'll scroll down, shows where primary schools funnel into middle schools that funnel into high schools. This is the current alignment. Parents may request in-district transfers to any other school outside of their primary boundary or secondary school assignment, depending on the school capacity. But transfers are not included. Transportation is not included for transfers. Parents have to, if they apply for a transfer, they have to provide the transportation. Riverside High School is an option high school and is open to any West Linn-Wilsonville high school student. If the board chooses to close one primary, option one, then there would likely need to be a minor reassignment of primary schools to middle schools in West Linn. A likely possibility would be if Stafford closes, the Beckman Stafford choice zone would be dissolved in the spring of 2025, and students that in that area temporarily assigned 1 year to Beckman Primary School until Frog Pond opens in the fall. The Stafford boundary would be reassigned to schools closest in proximity, such as Cedar Oak, Willamette, and Trillium. Sunset Primary School would move assignments to Athey Creek to keep the middle school enrollment as balanced as possible. If Bolton were to close, the boundary area would be reassigned to schools closest in proximity, mostly Cedar Oak, Trillium, and Willamette. Sunset Primary School would again move assignment to Athey Creek Middle School, keep the middle schools balanced. If Cedar Oak were to close, the boundary area would be reassigned to schools closest in proximity, mostly Bolton, Trillium, and Stafford. The primary school assignments would stay the same, with the anticipation that Stafford may lose choice zone students to Frog Pond, but gain students from Cedar Oak. If the board chooses to close two primary schools, then a more full evaluation of reassignments to primary schools will be necessary. Transportation changes will change with consolidation. Any school consolidated will be required to adjust transportation for students in their neighborhood schools. And I'll talk a little bit more about this as we get further into the presentation. If in communities where schools are very far apart, such as rural or sub-suburban districts, it can mean a significant amount of travel time. In West Linn, the schools are relatively close together, and the new routes that can be created while staying within the district guidelines of 45 minutes or less as a maximum bus ride. Currently, Stafford is the only primary school that has no walking boundary. All students are transported by bus or car, but I might expand on that a little bit. All students are offered a bus. The choice to travel by car is up to the parents. So all all students have the option to get a bus at Stafford. Not all choose that option. If Bolton and Cedar Oak are consolidated, a vast majority of the students from the consolidated school neighborhood would require transportation to their new school. And we did put together a little chart just to show the distance of travel from one school to the other. For instance, from Bolton to Cedar Oak is 2.5 miles. It's 5.9 miles to Stafford. And you can see the whole chart there. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Dr. Pryor.
So in the event that a school is closed, we would immediately begin thinking around a transition plan for students, staff, and parents. We do have some experience doing this from former boundary processes where students are in a middle of the time at primary, transition to a new school. Students are the first ones we think about, and this is a very brief summary. There would be more, but we would think around a transition plan that would first celebrate their traditions, spaces, and memories of their current school. Artwork, times capsules, memory books, and videos can all capture feelings and be tools to transfer that community and integrate it into a new school. And then we would begin thinking around how do we quickly begin to integrate them into a school. And we would think about over the summer, having opportunities for students to visit a school, to tour the school. As you probably already know, when school opens, right before school opens, we have events organized by PTAs where people can come, meet new families. We offer tours of the schools. They can meet their teachers. And then the first few weeks of primary school is always a time we focus on building classroom community because every classroom is brand new. Even in a mixed age classroom, half the students are new. So students are meeting each other, forming new friendships, figuring out when recess is so that they can meet some of their old friends. We still offer fall conferences early in the year. The fall conferences is a time for every family to have one-on-one time with the teacher to share what they know about their child and set those goals together. So we would be taking what's in place and trying to elaborate on it specifically to take really good care of the students who are coming to a new school community. We would also be thinking about parent and our guardians. Our parents we're so fortunate to have such incredible parent assets in terms of how much they participate in schools. And first thing we would be thinking around is how do we begin to merge some of our PTA leaders so they can take their traditions and integrate them into the new school, and using those PTAs to begin thinking around opportunities for meet and greets for families. And as I mentioned earlier, families do have the opportunity to meet with teachers early in the year. We would be thinking around ways over the summer for families to meet each other too, establish new connections so that they can start thinking of play dates and shared childcare and all the things that parents think about when they go to school together. We also think around staff transitions, and here we're really guided by our agreements with both the classified and the certified association. And so when we go through processes like this, the first thing we want to know is if someone needs to go to a new building, where do they want to be? What's good for their commute, their childcare, their lifestyle? And so we collect that information early on. And then by contract, we work through a seniority list. And so staff with the most seniority have the first opportunity to shift into those roles, whether it be at a location or a specialty. I want to teach 4th grade or I'd rather teach at this school and I don't care which grade it is. So we take that into account and work down our seniority list, both for classified and for certified staff in assigning staff. The one thing to note, which has been a wondering and a misconception, might be if budget challenges put us in a position where we do have to reduce staff, whether or not a school was consolidated has no impact on that. Reductions across the district are based on seniority, and your seniority is not impacted if you're in a school that gets consolidated. So while we would relocate staff into new buildings, a reduction in force would be a completely separate process, which would not be impacted by someone if they were in a school that was consolidated. Pat, I think you're back on.
I'm back up. So The next section revolves around costs of consolidating a school. If a decision is made to consolidate a school, there are still costs that are, albeit they're minimal, that are associated with owning the building. They're basic minimum utilities and some minimum maintenance that is required. We titled this section utilities, but it really is the cost of all things that are required for occupancy of a school. That includes water and sewer, alarm services for fire, security, elevator, electricity, natural gas for heat, and communication lines for telephones and alarm lines. There are, again, those operating costs that are required for occupancy, such as radon testing, water testing. There's mandatory inspections, things that aren't very sexy, but go check the grease traps, and the kitchen hood has to be inspected every year. And then those routine costs that always occur, routine filter replacement for the HVAC equipment, janitorial supplies, kitchen supplies, all of those behind the scenes recurring costs that happen every year. We did supply the actual costs for all of those things for each of the three schools for the 2023-2024 school year, because that budget is final and those are the actual costs you can see down to the penny. But if a building is closed, there are still recurring costs that we will incur, but they are minimal. Electrical costs will only be for the most basic use of heat and alarm systems that we will have to maintain in the building. It's estimated that the total electrical cost for any building will not exceed $6,000 a year. Natural gas will also be used, but it'll be greatly reduced. The building will only be set to 45 degrees, and that's only to keep pipes from freezing. So heat will only be needed during the coldest months of the year. And again, it's to keep the pipes from freezing. It's estimated that the total cost for natural gas will not exceed $2,000 a year. Water and sewer charges will be virtually eliminated because there will be no usage. Minimum charge is required to keep the meter on, so there will be a cost at Bolton and Cedar Oak, but that'll be essentially the only cost. It's estimated that those won't exceed $1,000 a year. At Stafford, it's on a private well and with a septic system. So while there are no meter charges for that, there still are costs. We do have a water treatment system at the school that requires maintenance, and we have to keep it going. And we do have septic system inspections that have to happen regardless of occupancy, but those won't exceed $5,000 a year. Or $500 a year, I'm sorry. So maintenance has been broken out with a 10-year average, and why it was averaged over 10 years is to not show these wild spikes that may happen if, for instance, a large air handler goes out, all of a sudden there's $40,000 of maintenance in 1 year at a school. These have been averaged over the last 10 years. And so you can see the totals: Bolton, $21,000 on average, Cedar Oak, $34,000 on average, Stafford, $67,000. A lot of that also has to do with landscape maintenance. More time is spent because the bigger sites require more maintenance. But if a building is closed, the maintenance will only be reactive. We will only be responding to a system failure, such as a fire alarm or a boiler alarm, or somebody sees water running out the front door. We will make periodic inspections on the building, make sure, walk through it once a month, but those costs will be minimal. And landscape maintenance will still be necessary at any of the buildings until a determination is made by the board on what the disposition of the building will be. Are we going to lease it? Is it going to be sold? Are we going to repurpose it for another use? But the maintenance costs are estimated to only not exceed $3,000 a year. The board may determine that a closed school can be leased to another organization or another public entity. In that case, we will, of course, turn all the utilities back on and negotiate the maintenance cost with the new tenant, but they'd be offset by the lease payments. The board may determine that a closed school or a property be sold. In that case, we would zero out the utilities on all of those, whatever building was chosen. The other additional cost for closing a school will be new transportation costs. I want to start by saying it is exceptionally difficult to know precisely what those will be until new boundaries are drawn and we can draw up new bus routes. What I'm about to describe is strictly mathematical. It's based on number of students and here's what the bus costs. Currently, Bolton and Cedar Oak have well over 50% of the students already on a bus. Buses or costs are determined by the route. And once they're on a bus, the destination, it doesn't matter whether they are delivered to Cedar Oak or to Bolton or to Willamette. It's the cost of the route that is what we pay. So those students' transportation costs will remain the same. The new additional costs will be incurred for those students that currently reside within the walking boundary for each student. And again, as Stafford has no walking boundary, all students are already offered buses. There will be no increased cost for Stafford. So the only increased cost will be potentially for Bolton or Cedar Oak. According to the records and the number of students assigned for student transportation they're below. I want to note that they don't necessarily align with enrollment. The numbers that we have are for every student that resides in the boundary. They may be going to private school, they may be homeschooled, they may be in a virtual charter school. So, but we wanted to show every potential possible student that could ride a bus in each of these areas. The chart has a legend beside it, and you'll see that N is they are not inside the attendance boundary. So at Bolton, there are 62 students that are not in the attendance boundary, and they are not eligible for for transportation today. The B is for the students at Bolton that are currently eligible for a bus. That is 138. H is a special hazard zone. Currently, Bolton does not have one. I'll talk about that when we get to Cedar Oak. But W is the new busing that would be required. Inside of the walking boundary, there are 41 students that currently attend Bolton, and they would now, if Bolton were closed, would be eligible for busing. At Cedar Oak, those numbers are 38 for the students that are not in the attendance boundary. There are 261 students that currently are eligible for a bus, and it's already provided. There are 7 in a special hazard zone, and there are some areas around Cedar Oak that we do provide busing, that are considered hazardous walking areas. So those 7 students are already provided a bus. And the new inside the walking boundary number would be 56 students. That would be new additional students to be bused. Calculating the cost is based on the number of students that'll now be transported, but it can't be exact without redrawing the boundaries. Each bus route costs $84,369. That's the yearly cost for a route for one bus. The district receives 70% reimbursement from ODE. So the district cost is $25,370 annually. New student transportation costs are incurred only for those students in the W category. For Bolton, that's 41. For Cedar Oak, that is 56 students. Again, this is a mathematical analysis only. While full-size buses technically have a capacity of 84 students, the district has asked for a student to only use 56 students. In a bus, technically they can put 3 students per seat. For student management, comfort of the ride, all of the reasons, we have asked them to reduce that to 56. So essentially our full-size buses are 56 students for primary school students. Based on that number of the additional students that'll require busing, it's estimated that one new bus will be needed for Bolton and 1 new bus will be needed for Cedar Oak Park. Those costs will be $25,370 per school. Again, the routes that students currently ride, once they're on the bus, the destination does not matter as long as it's under a 45-minute ride. So.
Thank you, Pat. Questions have also come forward about Chinese dual language, which is situated at Bolton. So we wanted to provide a little information about that. We originally located Chinese dual language at Bolton for a couple of reasons. One is Bolton had a thriving world language program with lots of community support. They also had capacity. We knew they had classroom space. So that's why we oriented the program there. However, enrollment has not grown at the rate expected to sustain the program to the level that we would like to see. There are currently 44 children in the program. 11 at kindergarten, 19 at first grade, and 14 at second grade. And through incredibly creative planning by the principal, Derek Porter, they're served by 2.7 teachers, which meet their needs throughout the day. When we analyze what enrollment looks like for Spanish dual language in our 2 schools, Trillium and Lowry, what we find is about 1/3 of those students in the program live in the boundary of the school where they attend. And about 2/3 come from other boundaries in the district. So you can see that data here in the first 2 bullets. The data looks differently for Chinese dual language in that roughly half of the students enrolled live in Bolton's attendance area, just 22 students, and about half live in boundaries of other schools in the district. That's also 22 students. So this leads us to have a wondering if perhaps the location might be contributing to enrollment. We are very committed to developing a sustainable Chinese dual language program for the long term. And so we may consider program relocation as a strategy for increasing enrollment so that program remains viable. The final section of this 3rd tab are district findings and comments contributed to by the entire district office leadership team. The analysis of the 3 schools, their enrollment, building and property features, capacity, consolidation scenarios, facility, utilities cost, educational program impact, and community sentiment lead the district to several findings for the school board. Finding number 1, Community sentiment is very clear that all three small schools are valued, are a reason for residing in the neighborhood, and are impactful to students, staff, and families. No school community wants their school closed. The district agrees that each of these schools play a foundational role in the life of each student, staff member, and family who attends the school, and that each school has outcomes of both academic and social emotional successes. Finding number 2, school size and educational impact. When a school gets too small, an educational impact does often with a sense of lost parity when staffing and resources are reduced. For example, this year at Bolton, the instructional coordinator was removed from staff due to declined enrollment. Both staff and the school community expressed disappointment that the school did not have parity with the other schools. As the enrollment continues to decline at these schools, additional staffing reductions will occur and the impact will be felt even more. In some districts where enrollment has fallen below 200, shared principal positions and alternating engineer custodial staff are often assigned. Finding 3, financial allocation. The district is committed to equity of educational programs and resources across all schools. This means that schools where there is greater student need, for example, academic disparity, impact of poverty, student mental health, and special education, should be receiving more resources to close opportunity and achievement gaps. Data from different district staffing ratios demonstrate that overall, the 3 smaller primary schools in West Linn have the lowest student staffing ratio than the other 6 schools in the district. And the chart is simply showing you enrollment, the number of each type of staff member, and then you add up all of those staff to create a ratio of how many students are there to each staff member listed in the chart. And so the last blue column, you can see the ratio of student to staff, or staff to student. Data from Edunomics, which was presented earlier, gleaned from ODE, demonstrate that these 3 schools receive more funding per student, an average of $18,456, than the other 6 primary schools, averaging $16,907, by $1,500 per student, including schools in lower socioeconomic conditions and higher academic disparity. In other words, more resources, staff, and funds are currently being allocated to the smaller schools who also have higher socioeconomic needs. For example, the district spends $3,000 more per student at Bolton with only 15% free and reduced meal eligibility than per student at Boone's Ferry with 40% free and reduced meal eligibility. Finding 4, research on school closures. There is no conclusive research that shows when students from a high-performing school transition to another high-performing school, the academic performance suffers or there are negative long-term impacts. There is research that shows schools in high racial minority or lower social economic conditions which close can have negative impacts on students and the community, particularly if the receiving schools are lower performing or do not have the room or resources to accommodate the influx of students. There's also a qualitative expression of loss of a well-known and often beloved institution when a school closes. Additionally, neighboring Oregon school districts in Clackamas County, which have closed schools, particularly one with very similar demographic composition, have not demonstrated any academic disparity due to closures. Finding 5, future facility needs. Flow Analytics 10-year projections predict very minimal growth for each of the 3 smaller schools by 2033-34 compared to current enrollment. Over that period, Bolton has an increase of 5, Cedar Oak an increase of 13, Stafford an increase of 11 students. This means that the consolidation of one of these schools can be sustained for at least the next decade. There's ample capacity at each of the other 3 West Linn schools to accommodate the sustained closure of one school over the next 10 years, particularly if the closure is Bolton or Cedar Oak Park. When Frog Pond Primary School opens, the Beckman-Stafford Choice Zone will be dissolved, and it is likely that the enrollment at Stafford Primary School were reduced even further than the flow analytics projections. There are currently about 60 students attending Stafford from the choice zone. However, as Frog Pond East and South develop, the second phase of its building construction will need to be completed in a future capital bond, and Stafford Primary School, if not closed, may be needed for a boundary adjustment that includes the former choice zone. The future of Stafford Primary School as a facility is the most unknown given its proximity to the Frog Pond development and whether another primary school is eventually built in Wilsonville. Stafford Primary School also currently encompasses the Norwood Urban Reserve between 65th and Stafford Road area, which is in the urban growth boundary, but there are sections with no utilities, infrastructure, or planning, but are buildable acres, 746. Stafford Primary School is also located near the Stafford Hamlet community where the urban growth boundary could be expanded into the future. In terms of property, Bolton has the least acreage with 3.3 acres. Cedar Oak Park has 11.22 acres and Stafford has 13.56. Parking is also most limited at Bolton and there are no playfields. Of the three schools, Bolton is the most landlocked with nowhere to expand should the district need the building or property for expansion. Finding 6 consolidation options based on enrollment, available capacity, and the Frog Pond opening delay. Options for consolidation are limited to none or 1 in 2025-26, any of the 3 schools, or 2 with 1 in 25-26, Bolton or Cedar Oak, and 1 in 26-27, which would be Stafford only. So we conclude with district executive leader comments. Based on the findings of the Small Schools Task Force, Long Range Planning Committee statement, research on small school closures, and an analysis of the 3 schools, the executive leaders, including the superintendent, have the following comments. If the school board chooses to keep all 3 small schools open, the district will respect the decision and begin the timeline and process for the 25-26 budget accordingly. If the school board decides to consolidate 1 school, the district has concerns should the board select Cedar Oak Park Primary School. In terms of enrollment, it is the largest of the 3 schools and the only one that actually has more students enrolled in 24-25 than the flow analytics projection. In terms of facility, its location on the north end of the district and building capacity allows it to absorb a neighboring consolidated school, either Bolton or Stafford. In terms of property, Cedar Oak Park, 11.22 acres, has room to add more classrooms onto the building or add other structures onto the property should the district need to expand the school or add other programs in the future. If the school board decides to consolidate 1 school, there may be more long-term viability factors to consider with Bolton or Stafford Primary School in 26 and 27.
So that was section 3, which was an analysis of the 3 schools. And in section 4, I'm only going to talk about 1 page of section 4. And then we'll be wrapping up presentation. So in section 4, it talks about the budget impacts with or without consolidation. Pages 38, 39, 40, and 41 are primarily what I shared in my superintendent report. So you have a repeat of some of those graphs and some of that information. I'd like you to now note that page 42 is similar to, the information is similar to what I shared tonight, but we've also added if 1 school were to consolidate for next year. So you can see in the 3 columns, on the left-hand side, it's just the title column. The second column from the left is if we don't consolidate any schools, keep things the same, but also make absolutely no reductions next year, which is not allowable because we'd be having a negative in the ending fund balance. But I just wanted to show you that's the start of where we are. The third from the left is no school consolidation, which is one of your options. It shows the state school fund biennium allocation, the beginning fund balance, so money that we would have at the end of this school year carried over. Again, these are estimates, but this is what it's looking like. The projected revenue, the projected expenditure. And then you can see in the white area, the proposal of a $15 million reduction. That's 7.46 million from district level and non-classroom. And then at the bottom, you can see what I had shown on the chart before, the classroom reduction. The column on the right is if you did elect to consolidate a school, what would the difference be? And where that difference would go is all the way down at the bottom. It would go directly to primary school. So it would not go to reducing any of the reductions up at the district level or non-classroom level. All of that savings of 1.45 million, even though it's coming from a lot of places, would be allocated directly to primary to bring down the reduction of the FTE there, which would reduce the class size, which I think is what you would be considering is what's the impact to primary when you have more schools and what's the impact to primary when you have fewer schools. Even though the district is larger than that and has many more components, I think that's the crux of that decision is how would it directly go back to impacting primary. So that's that chart there. The rest of the sections in the binder, section 5 again is the statement you got tonight, Long Range Planning Committee. Section 6, which is a large portion, that's the Small Schools Task Force's findings, their report, and all those tabulated sheets are charts and graphs that we provided for the Small Schools Task Force. They're available to the community. They're on the website. We've just made it convenient for you to have it in the binder in case you're doing some mobile homework or you want to go back and forth and you don't want to be clicking and trying to find things on the website. Additionally, all of the comments from the community engagement forums, you can pull those out. You see those are on 11 by 17 sheets, very small font, but we've also printed those out. They're also available, clickable on the website. And then some of the charts you'll recognize that were in the presentation. And then at the very end, we've also printed out some of the research and the articles that were referenced or were available for the Small Schools Task Force or community members. So with that, and I know we're going to probably take a break before we go into public comment. Again, it's like, we don't expect you to analyze this and do any deliberation on this tonight. You've just received it. You have 2 weeks to work through it, contact the district, any of us, if you have questions around the chart or the graph, and we can provide clarity, or if you think we're missing something that will help with your decision. So at this point, I think we transition back to you, Vice Chair, unless there's something specific you want answered right now, but I think you also want to leave time for public comment for this evening.
And just to provide some context for our audience, the superintendent is referring to a process that we regularly follow during our budget. And that's where we receive a similarly large binder, a lot of information, an overview, and then the board, along with the Citizen Budget Committee, has time to not only review the materials, but then get questions from the community as well. We submit them, and then those questions and then the responses are compiled so we all can learn collectively together. And so I'm just looking down at my fellow board members, thinking that that would be the process that we follow. If there are any procedural or just quick questions that anyone has, I'll look to you now to see if you have any. Otherwise, I'm thinking that we'll take a short break before we head into public comment, and then we'll also use this time. If you haven't signed up yet and you would like to make public comment this evening, please sign up on the board in the back. But otherwise, seeing no questions. Chair Taylor, did you have any questions that you'd like to ask at this point?
I do not.
So we will take a 5-minute break. And then when we come back, we will open up public comment. Thank you. All right, we are going to call this meeting back to order, and I'm looking forward to this public comment portion of our evening. Really pleased to see so many familiar faces, and so I'm not going to read the public comment introduction word for word. I'll just give you the quick summary overview. But as you may know, if we have folks that don't follow some of these instructions, we will suspend public comment for the evening. And the reason that we have some rules around public comment is to make sure that everyone has a chance this evening to have a chance to share their voice with the board and speak to us this evening. So we want to thank you for sharing your evening with us. You have signed up on this public comment sheet, and we will use this sheet to welcome you to the podium and microphone to make your comment. This is your time to for us to collect information from you and not to engage in a dialogue. So please don't mistake our silence for lack of interest. We are listening carefully and probably taking notes. If you're asking for us to respond or provide information, please provide your contact information so we may follow up with you. This is not a forum for singling out employees or students for complaints. Please use the district complaint process available on our website. And this time is to address the board and not the audience. All comments will be given their respect by the board. And so we ask that you, in return, be respectful of all speakers and refrain from giving cheers, claps, or negative noises when a member of the public is speaking or has concluded speaking. Please keep your comments to 3 minutes. And if 3 minutes isn't enough, you're welcome to reach out to us via email or reach out to us at a later time. So at this point, I'm going to go down the list, read your name, and you are welcome to the microphone to give your comment. And we have a 3-minute timer that we'll use for each speaker. So with that, let's get started. And I welcome Zeal Vanden Heuvel to the mic.
Hello. Good job, Chair Wyatt. You got my name. Chair Taylor, she got it on the first try. I'm here with 3 questions. Sorry, love all of you guys, but three questions that really came up from Dr. Ludwig's presentation tonight. First and foremost, thank you, Director Vidal and Director Sloop, for the incredible legislative advocacy work that you're doing. I think something that really stood out to me was the fact that we're going to be at this battle year after year, biennium after biennium, if we don't start solving at the state and possibly national levels. So my ask for you is this. You asked us to attend in person at the 2 different sessions that you mentioned. I would love to know if there are any organized efforts either in our own school district or across school districts, along with maybe Lake Oswego, for organized outreach of parents to state legislators. So I'm talking about templated emails that people can easily use, templated phone scripts that people can easily use that we see, when we come up on national or local elections. Secondly, Dr. Ludwig, you mentioned that paid leave in Oregon is 12 weeks. That's more than the private sector. So I feel like there needs to be some further renegotiation of expectations of time off and PERS contracts for teachers who are going to be new coming into this district to make it more sustainable in the long term if we know that state budgets are going to continue to be stretched. Second question, you mentioned that West Linn lost more students than Lake Oswego. We kind of have a similar population in terms of our demographics. I'm curious to understand if we know why. Why is it that LO didn't lose quite as many as we did? And is there anything we can do to bridge that gap? And then third, you also mentioned that high school and middle school enrollment is going to be declining over the coming years, which we saw also in the flow analytics projections. Where are the cuts to capital improvements and programs for middle schools and high schools? Like, we need to start discussing those now, because the fact that we opened the school year with 4 months to make a decision on primary schools is something we should learn from. If we had had this presentation tonight 4 months ago, we could also had more productive community conversations over these 4 months. So thank you.
Rachel Beavers.
Hi, my name is Rachel Beavers. I'm a parent of 2 Cedar Oak students. and I'm also a former member of the Small Schools Task Force. I learned many things as an SSTF member, but what really stands out to me today are first, our community is aligned in its support for small schools. And I heard this message again and again during my work as an SSTF member. Second, our former task force member, Amy Friday, studied research on small schools and found that enrollment of 400 or under 400 appears to be the consensus for what is considered to be a small school. Third, the 3 schools we are talking about have 3 of the 4 oldest school buildings, with 3 of the 4 smallest boundaries. This decision feels like it is not being based on enrollment, but it is on the cost to support our buildings that have not received updates. The current and disproportionate enrollment for each school is by design, and there is a choice to redesign and equalize enrollment. The smaller primary schools, Stafford and Bolton, have by design of the current boundaries fewer dwellings than the schools they border, and this can be remedied by shifting the bordering school boundaries with minimal disruption, allowing current students and current siblings or student siblings to be grandfathered in and given a choice to move with the boundary or to remain in their current school. I ask that you consider that Stafford and Willamette are bordering schools and have equal learning space capacity, but Stafford has 34% fewer dwellings than Willamette. Bolton has the fewest number of dwellings among all of our primary schools. And it has a greater learning capacity than boarding school Sunset, but 34% fewer dwellings and 38% fewer students. Trillium's dual language program with 140 students enrolled could be moved to Bolton to help equalize Bolton's disproportionately small boundary. Cedar Oak actually has more students than it did before the pandemic. If you choose to continue to support smaller schools, Cedar Oak's boundary could remain as is. Last, I would like to speak to the consolidation of Lake Oswego. Now, I Googled their schools and their number of schools, so I hope I get this right. But the average enrollment, which I did actually find before this, of their 7 primary schools is 380, which is very close to Westland's average of 356. Thank you.
Christy Lentz.
Well, I don't know whose idea it was to have this at Riverside, but it's a pretty funny joke. Basically, I wanted to talk to you guys about the fact that we could save $6.7 million without cutting from classrooms. If we just have a look at Central District Administration, which has increased by 71% since 2018. And average salaries have gone up 55.32% in administration. But K-5 expenditures are only increased by 16.23%. So what that means is that if you're making cuts from K-5, you're cutting from the place that is one of the smallest pieces of the pie. It's already taken a lot of cuts in the last few years. One thing that's really good, though, is our surplus of $10 million. If you see that on the next page, in the past, we've almost never had this kind of money as a surplus in our budget. We usually have somewhere more like 4 or 5%. Further back, it was only like 1% contingency. The assistant superintendent's positions have increased from 5 to 7 since 2018. That seems like a lot of administrators.
And could directors do the same job for less pay? We have improvement of instruction services, which has increased by 129%. We also have special services director, it's increased by 130%. And executive administration expenses increased by 38%. I can go on with all of that, but there are $6 million that you could cut from the budget without touching classrooms if you just wanted to follow cost of living adjustments and inflation from 2018. So I think we should have a hard look at administrative spending. That we also, I've noticed we're still posting for new jobs, even though we're thinking about closing schools. I wonder why we're doing that. I think maybe we should maybe put on a hiring freeze. That would make a lot of sense. I'd like you guys to just kind of look over what I have because I went through and I did all the numbers on this Excel sheet. So I would also like to say that it doesn't seem like you guys got a whole lot of real numbers from the district. It looks like it was a lot of averages and wishy-washy stuff like we'll find out when it's time to transfer. I would want to know a little bit more information than what we just received today. It doesn't seem like you got a whole lot. So, and it doesn't look like you're going to save a whole lot of money either. Thanks.
Amanda Brookshire.
Hi. I wasn't really planning on talking tonight, so sorry if I'm a little bit scattered and I threw in some questions and stuff, but I just hope we can all agree it's insane to be talking about opening a new school while simultaneously closing a school. Yes, that's like crazy. And just echoing boundary adjustments have always seemed like the obvious thing. Since day one, we've been saying this, hence our beginning arguments about transparency and the whole like why we're not really buying the argument of, oh, we're closing this, or we're just looking at closing the 3 small schools as we sit here in this beautiful school that is not projected to hit 300 students within the next 10 years, and listening to this very concise argument about why Bolton's not really cost effective. We should be focusing on kids and walkability and not putting kids through the ringer. That should be our priority. Something I haven't heard is, we have to talk about busing and stuff, which of course, what's that going to do to our traffic? Because it's not just going to be kids on the bus. It's going to really affect the traffic in the neighborhood. We can't really talk about Chinese language program not doing well if no one really knows about it. It's not advertised. Like I said, I'm kind of a mess. And I just want to highlight one thing I just keep hearing, which is this idea of equity. And I've heard over and over, oh, it's not fair that these older schools don't have all these new features, or the flip side of that, which is, oh, it's not fair that Bolton has all this like really good quality education because our numbers are really high and the other schools don't. But equity isn't like everything has to be equal. I would suggest it's more doing our best for everyone. But equity wouldn't be, I don't think equity would be closing a school, especially a school like Bolton. And if we close Bolton, we're going to cram all those kids into the other schools. And the numbers that you were talking about, looking at lower numbers, if we close the school, the numbers were going to be higher. That was just kind of interesting tonight. I wasn't quite sure about that. But lastly, I just want to say, if you keep Bolton open, we're going to help you in Salem. We need more money in the district. We all know that. So we're going to help you in Salem. But I'm just really worried if you close Bolton to save money, just on a realistic note, yeah, we'll carry on, but our hearts are going to be so broken. I'm not sure you're going to get a lot of support down in Salem helping. But we're here to do, whatever we need to do. And thank you guys for, obviously for all your time and everything you do. And just please don't think closing Bolton or any school is the solution to the problem. And let us know what we can do to help. Do we need to paint? Do we need to do more gardening? What do we need to do? Thank you.
John McCabe.
John McCabe, Westland, Oregon. One of the areas is Stafford School. There's a storage site there that is an accessory building to the school. This was a decision made by Remo Douglas. Mr. McGowan was there at the meeting because he was asked, is it an accessory building or is it a separate building? He said it's accessory building. All the public records were changed. That building is part of the Stafford School. It is an RRFF5 area. You close the school, you close the warehouse. The school district will tell you, we'll just go out and get it changed. There's already been a judgment on it. Conditional use is the school has to be open or it goes. It would not have been allowed to be put there under the conditional use permit in RRFF5 unless it was an accessory building to the Stafford primary. Then there's the issue of attendance, enrollments. We've been told that they don't exist. I already have them. I've had them since November. I thought I had sent it out to you people. When you look at it, every single school in Wilsonville is below 500 students, the primaries are. And then if you also look at the budget, it's been spoken to us about the $10 million. Two issues. One, the opening of the school is a high school. We added teachers. Millions of dollars more in expenses that were not there prior. Second, account 1220 and 1250 has increased by over $5 million just for the 23-24 year. There's your problem with the budget. It needs to be addressed. It has its own issues, but the SIA grant should have been used for that. Instead, general funds were used. And that's how there was a reduction in the general fund, like I said, of $5 million. Then on the GEO bond, what you have not been told is there's been $10,370,000 of earned interest since 2015 on that GEO bond. That shows up in no long range planning committee report of how much more revenue they've received. What is it equivalent to? Doing all new roofs throughout the whole school district. So when we talk about the bond sum, it's sort of like, we got $10 million. And I know the audit has been released, but I got that too. Because they are public records, they are supposed to be released by the school district. I never get any public records from the school district. I have to go to ODE to get anything. And I hope as a school board, you instruct the administration, if people ask for a public record, it is a public record and should be released immediately. Thank you.
Zareth Irwin.
Hi, thank you. I just want to start with, I've spoken to a couple other school board meetings, and my thing is, I think always is coming from a place of assumed good intent. And this has been a very emotional process for lots of people. And I've not been one of those people that's been negative to anybody or any of that stuff, even though there's a lot of that in the background, as I'm sure you all know. I would say, first of all, I think this is great, and we're in an awesome spot. With that presentation, now we can start to talk about what's the problem and what to do. That seems like the beginning, not the finish. This whole time we could not figure out exactly what are we trying to fix? What are we going to do? It seems like now we know the problem and we know the background on it. We should start a conversation about what to do. In the beginning, it was a big problem. It said, we need to know soon. This is a rush. And I stood up at school board meeting and said, I don't know what efficiencies you have in this business, but I'm on boards and finance committees and other businesses. And I could never get this done that quickly. This is a big thing to do, and it's a rush. And I don't see any way looking back that anybody can look good and say, we rushed into this process that turned out to be pretty flawed because we created this small schools task force that got shut down. I'm not sure what plan B was, but I haven't seen a plan B. If we thought it was valuable, then we'd say, okay, that was valuable. Now what do we do? I think it's also human nature and important to recognize human nature. I bet everybody in this room has a bias, has an opinion. I do. I'm a father of 2 children at Bolton, one in dual language immersion. If somebody said to me, do you have any bias? Like, well, how can I deny it? Of course I do. We walk to school. That's where my kids go. We love Bolton. I'm not at the other schools. So I just want to acknowledge this is human nature. So we all have that. I also think the long range planning committee is clearly making a recommendation. They're just not willing to endorse it. And I can say that, okay, we don't want to put our name on it, but this presentation tonight, it does seem like some of the negativity and stuff I've heard is there already a decision made? It feels that way. We said there's 3 schools on the block. Well, maybe 2, because we heard tonight why you can't close one of them. And it just seems to me like that's not all adding up, and it's a rush got us into this problem, and rushing through the problem and say, well, we had a plan, but it didn't work out, but we got to make a huge decision right now. There's no way for that to look good ever. We look back and say, well, that's what we did. We had to do it right away, and it impacted the lives of many people. I also don't see that it's mentioned 12% of the people at Bolton, those children, are transfers in, far higher than other people. Sure, it's a smaller N, the sample size, I get that. But it's also people are saying, we want to go there from other places. That didn't come up at all. That seems important, that this place that people are desiring to be. I think, I just don't get how we would say, we've made this decision now, we got to rush into this thing. We have a committee, it didn't work out, so we just got to go through with it. How that could ever come out to people say, hey, we think that was the right thing to do. Sorry, you can tell I'm out of sorts because I wrote something down, so, and I never do that. So anyway, thank you.
Courtney Boudres.
Hi, good evening. I have a couple questions. In a previous meeting that I attended, if memory serves, it was David Pryor that explained that if a school were to close, it wouldn't only be that community that would be impacted, that boundary lines would be redrawn, and it would essentially affect the population of primary students, which makes sense that the map would shift. Some kids from Sunset per se would maybe go to Willamette, et cetera. My impression tonight was that were a school to close, those kids would get split up. Not only is their school closing, but then their community is being divided amongst up to 3 schools. Can you clarify? I'm not sure which is actually correct.
A reminder that during our public comment period, we don't respond to questions. It's not a back and forth or a town hall.
Okay.
But we have recorded that, and we'll make sure that in our follow-up meetings, we can respond. Or if you'd like to email us for a response, we can also do that as well.
Okay. I didn't feel like it was a question for the board per se, so much as for the district. So I was hoping maybe they would be able to clarify the document that they had published tonight.
I'm not going to answer the question, board, but you could remind parents that we'll linger after this meeting if anyone has to ask us questions, but this is public comment for you.
Great. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. And then also tonight, it was fascinating to get so much information that I agree. One of the other commenters said it would have been very nice to have information like this at the beginning of this process. But given that, oh no, I've totally blanked the time pressure. Sorry, give me a moment. I'm not good under pressure. Can you tell? I hate speaking in front of people. This is so out of my element. Maybe I'll remember it and I'll email it. Thanks.
Athena Contreras.
So today I'm just going to go ahead and highlight a few things in the document that I sent you guys in email. I'm sure you guys, it's a 40-page document, so I thought I'd highlight a few things. This is from the Oregon School Siting Handbook, and it's about kind of how to figure out where and how to do locate schools. And there's a lot of things in it that I think are relevant if we were making a decision today, including how to keep things in the city center, which is actually quite hard to do as a city develops. But I'm going to start with this. Schools unite neighborhoods. The role of the school as a neighborhood focal point is not new. As long ago as the 1920s, Clarence Stein, architect and city planner, advocated for towns in which a school was the physical center of the neighborhood, reflecting its prominent role in the community. He believed that a centrally located school reinforces community life and spirit because it is easily accessible and can serve as a community crossroad. In Stein's view, the majority of the students should live within a quarter mile of the school. The school's role as community focal point is still seen today. Parents meet each other while taking their children to school. Neighbors bump into each other while walking their dogs on the school grounds. Grandparents attend the school play and recognize a friend from long ago. Through these informal interactions, social networks are formed that help people provide a stronger support system for children and feel more connected to the community. Transportation costs are increasing. The cost of transporting students to and from school has risen significantly as school sites have become less community-centered and located farther from the neighborhoods that they serve. Recent fuel prices increases are straining the budgets of parents and local school districts, both of which often provide student transportation. Childhood obesity is rising. If children live within a mile and a half of school, there's a significantly better chance that they will walk to school. In 1969, close to 90% of students who lived within a mile of school walked or biked to school. By 2000, this number decreased to only 10%. The Institute of Medicine cites the decrease in walking and biking to school as one of the major contributors to childhood obesity. Among 6 to 11-year-olds, obesity has tripled over the last 3 decades. And I believe that for mental health, or not mental health, but just like behavior, you get endorphins when you're walking, you get camaraderie, and a lot of other benefits from that too. The location of schools is one of the most important decisions a community will make, and it goes on throughout this to cite the importance of neighborhoods, walkability being a primary focus on any school. So I only have 16 seconds left. I'm not sure I can do a whole lot more. Thank you.
Trisha Guarisco.
Hi, thanks for being here tonight. I wasn't planning on speaking, so my thoughts was just more of a response to what I saw this evening presented. So just bear with me. Just to remember that our district is based on a small school model, but we do have variety with larger schools as the anomaly. At the primary level, we mostly have small schools with a handful of big ones or bigger ones. Our high schools, we have 2 large ones with an option for a small high school, which is where we are now. So what do we want as a district? It seems like we like to have options, as all schools are well supported, even though they're different. So someone mentioned the Flow Analytics high school and middle school number projections. They didn't account for in-migration. Please keep that in mind. They did not account for people who move in at 1st, 2nd, 3rd, all the way through 12th grade. That report did not account for that in-migration. As far as No Child Left Behind, if we were to follow that guidance, then we would be sending all of our students to, I think it's Bolton. I think they might be the highest scoring school. I don't know. I don't have kids at any of the primary schools at this point. But if we really were trying to follow that guidance, then we would be sending our kids to the highest performing schools. So it sounds like what has been proposed tonight is possibly a larger school model. Is that what we want? We're having this meeting tonight at a small school. If every school is jam-packed, there is no flexibility for events just like this tonight. I imagine we didn't have it at Westland High School tonight because they have a lot of activities going on. It's nice to have resources and it's nice to have them spread out. I'll repeat, enrollment is always fluctuating, to repeat what was said earlier this evening by administration. If this is about comparisons of small schools, let's compare all of them. including this one, including Frog Pond. Let's look at all, if we're going to rearrange the furniture, let's look at all of the furniture. If this is about primary schools, let's compare all of them. Have you considered closing down Trillium and it's centrally located and reassigning those students to the various adjacent schools? Has that been considered? It would be one disruption, and maybe it's too big. Maybe Trillium is too big. Instead of saying what's wrong with our small schools, well, maybe our larger schools need to be smaller. Let's look at everything. Let's think critically. Let's not rush through this. Let's look at minimal disruptions. And, buses, no 45-minute bus ride for these little kids. It's too long for them. Okay, thank you.
And we have one Zoom comment, Amy Friday.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, excellent. I'm sorry to everyone that I'm not there in person tonight. I was told I have pneumonia today. So I apologize for the croakiness. I'll get started. Thank you so much for having this. My name is Amy Friday. I'm the mother of two awesome West Linn-Wilsonville primary school kiddos, former member of the SSTF and a neuropsychologist. And I already spoke earlier in the process about the wealth of data supporting the benefits of small schools. I'll emphasize then, and I'll say it again, that the data is clear. Despite what Dr. Pryor was saying about there not being actual data on small schools, there is data on what most researchers conclude is the optimal size of small schools, which is 300 to 400 students. And this is reflected across data that represents academics, community bonds, student engagement, social emotional development, and so on. And it's been echoed by parents, teachers, and stakeholders throughout the process. It's in the wealth of data that we provided to you in our report. And it would be really useful if we can think about what the national data says for schools, rather than saying, well, it can be challenging. And I agree with Dr. Pryor, it can be challenging if you don't have a lot of classrooms to balance classrooms and balance teachers and so on. But the striking finding is that every year we do it and we do it well. And the teachers are not complaining and saying, let's close our schools because this is too stressful for us, or it's not working for the students. The outcomes show that it does work for the students. So the Small Schools Task Force was constructed to ask what happens when schools get too small. And that's an important question, but it's not the issue here. Our schools haven't gotten too small. Their sizes align with national research indicating that they're operating effectively, producing great benefits across multiple domains. So it's an asset, not a liability. For the one small school that is below the 300 student mark, my colleague Rachel Beavers, who already spoke, educates us on how this is by design with our boundary plan. And by changing boundary lines, it could be addressed with minimal disruption to families. So if the real issue then isn't the viability of small schools, but it's the broader challenge of addressing the district's budget deficit, and how they decide to allocate future funds is going to have lasting impacts, not only on the educational experience of our children, but on the overall strength and sustainability of our entire school system. So we've acknowledged there's no single solution to the deficit. Consolidating or closing small schools won't solve it. And in fact, acting hastily in this direction could create unintended financial problems in the future. So what I'm calling for now is a strategic and comprehensive approach, and I am strongly requesting that the board consult with an external budget analyst. They would give fresh eyes to identify the most effective and equitable measures to reconcile the budget, while ensuring that small schools and all of our schools continue to deliver high quality education that our community both expects and deserves. So overall, the data supporting small schools is clear. It's critical to ensure that we have all the facts and a comprehensive understanding of the financial and educational implications, and hiring a budget analyst is the most rational next step. In order to do this, we have to continue to support all of our schools.
Thank you, Amy. I think you've reached your 3-minute mark. I don't know if you could hear that alarm.
I will finish my sentence. As long as we think about the Bond Summit process for all of our schools. Thank you so much for all of your work.
Thank you. And that concludes our public comment for this evening. So thank you to everyone who signed up and spoke. At this point, we have reached the end of our meeting, and our last item is to review the important dates in front of us. But I'd like to name for the school board that we currently have our meeting on January 27th listed as a work session. And I know that as we've heard tonight from staff, and then as we've talked about in our community meetings, that we may want to consider having that as a deliberative or decision-making meeting. Do I have a motion from the board?
I move to make the January 27th, 2025 work session a special board meeting.
I'll second. Is there any discussion from the board? Dr. Shoemaker?
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about what that means. Changing the how we designate that meeting, what that means for us. So my understanding is, as you indicated, that we could reach a decision. We wouldn't have to make a decision, but this would allow us to make a decision if we felt we were ready to make a decision on that night. Is that correct?
Yes, currently it's listed as a work session, and it would be noticed as a special board meeting.
Yeah, in your descriptions of work sessions, they're typically scheduled to be where you learn something and there isn't really decision-making or voting going on, work of the district. So could be confusing to the community if we continue to call it a work session and now it's changed to where you're actually deliberating about work of the district and possibly making a decision.
Seeing no further questions from the board, please call the vote.
Chair Taylor,
Aye.
Oh, sorry, 1 minute. One more question from Director Shoemaker.
Well, I guess I'd just like to hear more from anybody who wants to make a comment about whether or not we want to do it that way. Any thoughts?
I think that's the nature of the motion. Is to have it as a special meeting.
Would there be public comment allowed?
So that would be up to you as a board. Typically, you reserve public comment in your guidelines for regular meetings. You don't have them for work sessions, and when you've called a special meeting, you've typically not had public comments. Often in those cases, it's because there's a quick turnaround. And so as a special meeting, you don't have to, again, it's also a decision by the board. Remember, public meeting laws requires that people can observe a meeting. You don't have to have an oral public comment section, but that is completely up to you as a board if you'd like to organize it that way for another public comment.
So
section.
can we make that decision tonight then at the same time that we would vote to make it a special board meeting? Is that the expression, special board meeting?
It seems like the motion was made for it to be a special meeting. And so if folks would like it to include a public comment period, perhaps we act on that motion. And then if folks would like it to include public comment, vote no on this motion, and then a new motion could be made for it to be a regular meeting, for it to include public comment. Because I think what I'm hearing is our typical rules. So if someone were to come brand new to this and see regular meeting versus special meeting. And I think the reason to do a special meeting would be if we wanted to devote the entirety of that meeting to board, to staff Q&A, and then board discussion versus having public comment as a portion of that meeting. So, and then perhaps during this time right now, if there are any reflections from this board about how you would like to best structure your time on the 27th. I personally, and I'll start that discussion. I am very interested in having a list of questions that I've been generated, answered publicly by staff, as well as having a discussion with my fellow board members. I do not feel as much of a need to have public comment because I feel as though in the past week, as well as at prior board meetings, I've had a chance to hear from so many community members. And I also feel if we are going to deliberate to a decision, having that time dedicated to that Q&A and discussion is most helpful for me. But I welcome others' thoughts.
I'm happy to give my thoughts. I also feel that time would be best spent at a special board meeting, asking administration questions, deliberating amongst the board, because we have had the opportunity to hear from the public via the events we've attended and through email. I personally would suggest to the public that if they have further comments they would like me to consider as a board member, to please email the board and we can review them that way. But I really feel that we need to deliberate amongst ourselves as a board and discuss these very difficult questions and make a decision.
Chair Taylor, any thoughts that you'd like to share? And then I'll look to Director Sloop and Director Shoemaker for any thoughts before we call the question.
Nope, I don't have anything to share.
I don't love the idea of making a decision on a night when we don't allow the public to make any comments. I'm just saying. Now, in term, hey, can you just hang on a second, Jerry? I want to be most efficient with our time. So if we can, we can spend all night that night deliberating. And I suppose if we're ready to make a decision, then we need to have set up the meeting so that we could make a decision. But I'm just going to say right now, I would vote for us if we make it a special meeting that we say that we would also allow public comment, even though I think that makes for a longer night if public wants to make comment. But that's just what I think.
You can make a motion
Sir,
to ask that.
I know.
Sorry, the community just got all the information. It'd be nice to have one opportunity in front of everyone to make our comments. So maybe.
Okay, hang on a second.
Do you have a seat? Thanks. You could set a time constraint and just say, we're going to hold public comment for, 1 hour, and then we need to devote the next 2 or 3 hours for deliberation. I think there's no wrong answer. I think you just need to decide one way or the other. And
I'm ready.
yeah.
So we need a motion.
Well, we've had a motion and a second.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we need to, we either need to vote on that motion or rescind that motion and make a new motion if we're going to have public comment. So
If there's an interest in rescinding the motion and then making a new motion to specify having a special meeting with a limited amount of public comment, is that an option that anyone is interested in at this time?
I'm happy to rescind my motion.
All right, motion rescinded for note taking. Is there a motion to set a meeting for January 27th?
Yeah, I would move that we designate January 27th as a special board meeting and that we designate a set amount of time for public comment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I have a question for Director Shoemaker. Given that we're now thinking about it being a board meeting with public comment, do you want to just make it a regular, like this would be like a regular board meeting, which would include public comment? So that you can preserve the description of special board meeting as those that often happen unexpectedly, don't usually contain public comment.
You're going to have me rescind another.
Just change it from a work session to a regular meeting, which would include opportunity for the board to deliberate, take action if they're ready to do so, and public comment. Which would be the definition of a regular meeting. And by the way, you've always had in regular meetings the opportunity to restrict the amount of time. I just think this year you've waived that because of the nature of the topics. And so you've just let everyone speak and go, but I think there's something in there about an hour and then you vote whether you want to extend that. So.
I think, Dan, having made the motion, if you'd like to rescind it.
Yes, I'll rescind my previous motion.
All right.
And I'll move that on the 27th, we have a regular board meeting. And
Thank you. Is there a second?
with
Possible action and opportunity for public comment. Correct?
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the purpose of a regular board
Yes.
meeting is that.
Yeah.
That's why we're not calling a work session, because then we would be limited to not having reaching a decision. Okay. So a regular board meeting on the 27th, that would include a limit to public comment. Like we'll make it 1 hour.
Second. All right. Any discussion? Please call the vote.
Chair Taylor,
Aye.
Vice Chair Wyatt,
Aye.
Director Shoemaker,
Aye.
Director Sloop,
Aye.
Director Vidal.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right. With that, this meeting is adjourned and our next meeting is on January 27th at West Linn High School.